He snapped his fingers lightly. Thousands upon thousands of fish leaped out of the river. The fisherman curiously asked,
어디 그런 울룩불룩하게 생긴 잡기 따윈.
그럼 용암님?
늙었잖아, 그 양반.
그럼요?
털 날려.
He's a devil from hell. Just then, a tuna weighing over 100 pounds actively jumped into the fisherman's arms, enough to solve the family's food problem. But the devil produced a contract. The term was 10 years. During this time, the fisherman's hunger would be guaranteed.
너의 육신은 죽고 영혼은 내가 옮겨줄게.
네가 온 것이라니.
거기도 너희들이 부르는 이름이 있지.
So, under the devil's temptation, the fisherman signed the contract with his blood. Little did he know that the devil would deceive people with tempting rewards, causing them to lose their original aspirations. Although most people lose themselves due to external temptations, but it's the lack of doing good that is the root of desire. The devil merely exploited that. Time flies, and it's now 2023. Duduhi is the little princess of Myri Group, known as the IU of the dessert world, and the Kim Yuna of the culinary industry. For 2 consecutive years, she's been called the devil in Hermes. However, despite all the accolades, she couldn't escape her mother's pressure to go on blind dates. Meanwhile, the devil, Young Gu-won, while inspecting the Samcheon River, discovered that a contract had expired. At the same time, time suddenly stopped around the gang boss. Just as he thought the hourglass was broken, the gates of hell suddenly opened directly opposite him. The devil, Young Gu-won, stepped out. He summoned the contract book from thin air. The underworld boss instantly understood. He cried out to heaven and earth, to no avail. So he negotiated, asking if the contract could be extended, or perhaps even renegotiated. However, Young Gu-won warned him not to waste his breath. Leave gracefully. The underworld boss still struggled. He was willing to trade 100 lives for his own. But the devil only wanted the soul of the one who signed the contract. In fact, the contract was already predetermined. The underworld boss would die of cardiac arrest. Then he would endlessly run on hell's millstone and endure hellfire capable of melting flesh and bone. Young Gu-won ultimately possessed the soul of the ultimate underworld boss. When he returned to the Samcheon River office, he happened to be seen by a younger brother. Meanwhile, Dudu arrived at the restaurant for her blind date. Coincidentally, it was also her birthday today. She had planned to just get it over with. But the moment the other person revealed their face, the words died in my throat. My blind date was incredibly handsome. At this moment, Young Gu-won was unaware of what was happening. He showed no interest in the woman before him. Because humanity is insignificant in the face of a devil. Dudu was also stunned. Such a handsome guy, and yet he's a psychopath. She stood up and decided to leave. I just received a message from my adoptive mother, ordering me to go on a blind date. Dudu had no choice but to grit her teeth and endure it for 30 minutes. Now it's Young Gu-won's turn to be curious. With so many restaurants to choose from, what on earth is this stubborn lunatic trying to do? Actually, Dudu's blind date is someone else. And so, the devil and the human sat together. During the meal, Young Gu-won couldn't understand why she insisted on eating opposite him. Dudu frankly admitted that she wouldn't have done it if it weren't for orders from above. She couldn't disobey the divine will of her superiors. Young Gu-won, upon hearing this, was eager to know the intentions of his superiors. Dudu didn't hide it either, making it clear that the purpose was a blind date.
지금 네 말은 신이 나한테 맞선을 주선했다.
Just then, his younger brothers showed up. Coincidentally, they managed to get a package delivered in 30 minutes. Dudu prepared to leave. Dudu's attitude towards Young Gu-won instantly changed. She found him aloof yet kind, pure and sexy. Unknowingly, she fell for the man before her. Young Gu-won watched Dudu. He muttered to himself, "It's okay, nothing's wrong." This made Dudu a little nervous. She immediately rushed into the bathroom to ease the awkwardness. Actually, Young Gu-won's "nothing's wrong" referred to the cake. Dudu bumped around clumsily in the bathroom. She didn't expect that this seemingly irresponsible person would specially prepare a birthday cake for himself. But then again, he didn't show any sign of interest. He suddenly floored the gas pedal. And on top of the heroic rescue just now, a blush crept onto her cheeks. Dudu realized she was acting strangely, trying to cover her flustered feelings with foundation. But unconsciously, she started applying lipstick. She seems to be really looking forward to her date with Young Gu-won. Meanwhile, Young Gu-won was just about to take a bite of his cake when it was knocked away by his younger brother. He had reserved it a month in advance. So Young Gu-won suggested they talk after he finished eating. His perfectly good vacation was ruined. Young Gu-won was genuinely angry. He grabbed a nearby newspaper to clean up the mess. The unsuspecting younger brother suddenly was sucked into the newspaper. Calmly, Young Gu-won rolled the newspaper into a tube. The mark on his wrist began to glow. Anyone who was touched by the newspaper was immediately swallowed up by it. Finally, with a snap of Young Gu-won's fingers, all his men disappeared. When Daoshi returned, the cake on the table was a mess. She still held onto a sliver of hope, but Young Gu-won interrupted her, telling her to leave the restaurant immediately. This brief meeting, born from a misunderstanding, came to an end. On the way back, the secretary reported that the family was engaged in an internal struggle. Dudu's peaceful life was about to be disrupted. A woman facing mortal danger sends a cry for help to a devil. However, the moment their hands touched, their identities were unexpectedly switched. It turned out the secretary was reporting to Dudu. There was an internal power struggle within the conglomerate. The instigator was No Suan. Myri Group was one of the top 10 chaebols in South Korea. Its legendary chairman was named Ju Cheon-suk. Her eldest son, Ro Suk-min, was a second-in-command living in his mother's shadow. His eldest daughter-in-law, Kim Se-ra, was a goldfinch yearning for attention. Chong-sun Lu Dao-ching willingly lives as a ghost for survival. Second daughter, No Suan, is obsessed with life abroad and has a pair of twin sons. Ju Cheon-suk's nephew from Pyeongtaek, Ju Suk-hoon, although the only family member with the surname Ju, is more like a business partner. It's clear that Ju Cheon-suk doesn't particularly like these people. She dotes on her adopted daughter, Du Du-hee, instead. Du Du-hee naturally understands that she's not related by blood to the others. They wouldn't easily show hostility. A smile is their most lethal weapon. Who will inherit the corporation in the future? It all depends on the outcome of this family struggle. But he said it was inconvenient to discuss it over the phone. He hoped she would consider it and contact him again. However, the call was disconnected shortly after. Ju Cheon-suk sent a text message. Du Du-hee rushed into the hospital room in a hurry. She saw Ju Cheon-suk lying there, motionless. Tears instantly welled up in her eyes. It turned out this was the surprise the elderly woman had prepared for Du Du-hee. She wanted to see her reaction after her death. Would their beautiful moments flash by like a revolving lantern? Du Du-hee was somewhat upset. It was mentioned that Ju Cheon-suk paid her boyfriend to break up with her. However, the envelope didn't contain a check. Instead, it was filled with shopping discount coupons. Ju Cheon-suk changed the subject. She asked how today's blind date went. Then she took out the man's photo and they started discussing him. At this moment, the secretary came in to report. The matchmaker had gotten the restaurant address wrong. In other words, I mistook the person at the blind date. So I immediately called Young Gu-won. I wanted to apologize for what happened, but he hung up before I could finish. Ju Cheon-suk was angry. But the most important thing now was to quickly arrange another blind date for the almost 30-year-old Daoshi. Her wish was to see her married before she dies. Ju Cheon-suk took out the wedding ring she had prepared beforehand. She cautioned Daoshi, anyone can stab you in the back at any time. But if there's someone you willingly let stab you, that means they're your own. It turned out that Daoshi's parents' death anniversary and her birthday were on the same day. Ju Cheon-suk lit the birthday candles, hoping the tragedy would end today. However, before the sentimental moment ended, the elderly person hurriedly contacted their blind date. Meanwhile, Young Gu-won was still brooding over not getting to eat dessert. This caused him to be unable to concentrate.
데이트.
데이트?
나 비도받지.
누구랑? 여자랑?
On the other hand, Cha Tae-jun was still waiting for Du Du-hee's call. He was about to leave when a person with scratch marks on their neck was drowned in the bathroom. Du Du-hee couldn't find No Suan, so she went to the beach alone. She unconsciously recalled happy times with her parents years ago. Sadness welled up. She endured what felt like a cursed birthday there. And the price for calling arrived. On the way back, Du Du-hee noticed that the designated driver app showed the driver was still 17 minutes away. She immediately realized something was wrong, and the person driving had scratch marks all over their neck. In fact, the real designated driver had already been murdered. The killer was no longer disguising themselves. They pulled out a drug and held it over Du Du-hee's mouth, casually mentioning Ju Cheon-suk is the reason. A moment later, Du Du-hee lost consciousness, just as the assassin was about to strike. Du Du-hee got out of the car and ran. Meanwhile, the devil Young Gu-won had locked onto a desperate, lonely, and trembling soul. Du Du-hee suddenly noticed a figure moving in the distance. She immediately rushed forward to seek help. However, on closer inspection, the person was actually Young Gu-won. For a moment, she forgot to call for help, and started brainstorming. Why was Young Gu-won here? Could he be in cahoots with the assassin? For a moment, I couldn't tell who was the enemy. Du Du-hee decided to gamble. She ran towards Young Gu-won. However, Young Gu-won insisted on signing a contract before helping. In this life or death situation, Du Du-hee thought it over and agreed. But while Young Gu-won was fighting the assassin, she escaped in a car. Just as I was about to start the engine, I saw Young Gu-won closing in step by step. Du Du-hee hid by the bridge, but she was quickly discovered. The moment the killer reached for her hand, some kind of reaction seemed to occur. Then the assassin started the car and charged towards them. Young Gu-won calmly snapped his fingers. Nothing happened. His magic had disappeared. Du Du-hee was the first to wake up. She could have escaped alone, but she couldn't leave her savior behind. She wanted to pull Young Gu-won up with her, but the moment her hand touched him, the mark of the devil appeared on her hand. Eventually, due to exhaustion, they both fainted. After an unknown amount of time, they woke up on a beach. Young Gu-won looked at the mark on Du Du-hee's wrist, hardly believing his eyes. What will happen next? The demon merely glared. The woman's hand froze mid-air, but before he could gloat, it turned out that Young Gu-won's demon mark, for reasons unknown, had transferred to Du Du-hee's wrist. She fainted the moment the ritual ended. She woke up in the hospital, only to find she had a considerate new blind date. Young Gu-won in front of secretary, acting particularly anxious, constantly concerned about whether there is any discomfort. This made the upright secretary hide out in embarrassment. But the secretary just left. Even the devil Young Gu-won is no longer pretending.
정말 괜찮은 건가?
괜찮은 거 같네?
안타깝게도 난 전혀 괜찮지 못해. 그래서 옆에 기다렸고.
9元指了指到西的印记。
뭐야 이 판박이 스티커는?
뭐 판박이?
아니 이 손목이 왜 이렇게 촌스러운 게
he wants to wipe it off? He even spit. Suddenly, she remembered last night's killer, and the unknown place. But he would rather believe it was a drunken hallucination, than believe it was real. She said this while wiping away the mark. Young Gu-won immediately blocked her path, refusing to let he leave, no matter what. The two young people began to argue. That's why the opening scene happened. There's a detail here. Young Gu-won needs to be holding he's hand to activate his skill. The demon, sporting a handprint on his face, is furious. He regrets saving he last night. However, he feels she kindly pulled young Gu-won ashore. Then, she got a tattoo on her wrist. Just then, the secretary came in with the attending physician. This quarrel between the bickering couple came to an end. Coincidentally, a contract was expiring. Young Gu-won warned he to stay away from lasers and a tattoo removal project called Pororo. He returned to the Samcheon River office. He found the housekeeper secretly reading the devil's instruction manual. It turned out that the devil existed for the contract. If you don't sign a new contract or violate any of the promises made before the contract expires, even for a second, it will lead to annihilation. The butler is worried about the devil's unexpected accidents, so he wants to know how often the contract must be renewed. Actually, young Gu-won doesn't know either, so he's often anxious. Suddenly, the butler discovers the mark is gone. And plus, I felt that the demon lord's personality was different from usual, so he wanted to make sure. Sure enough, his magical powers had all disappeared. However, young Gu-won was still stubborn. He said he had temporarily lent his magical powers to someone else. In short, he had to solve the immediate crisis first. He had to retrieve the contract that was due today. The butler thought that without magical powers, he couldn't do anything. But for young Gu-won, a demon who has existed for 200 years, reaping souls is as easy as chewing bubblegum. Scene change. Young Gu-won is thrown several meters away by his contractee. But for the sake of appearances, he still gets up and tells the other party, "Don't struggle. Leave with some dignity." Unexpectedly, the other party doesn't play fair. Dozens of strong men swarmed him, completely ignoring the devil's call for a one-on-one fight. Young Gu-won, having lost his magic, was brutally beaten. He had no choice but to unleash his earth-shattering ultimate technique. Even as he escaped, young Gu-won didn't forget to leave a parting threat, saying he would teach his contractor a lesson. Though it felt good to talk tough, he was truly humiliated inside. Meanwhile, he was also extremely busy. She felt that young Gu-won first went on a blind date with her, then suddenly appeared to save her, and now wants to sign some kind of contract. It's definitely not good for the company. Furthermore, due to internal strife, the group's stock price fell by 10%. They lost a whopping 260 billion won. Suddenly, she remembered what the assassin had said. She ultimately decided to find Ju Cheon-suk first. Cut to He and Ju Cheon-suk arrive at the flower garden. She tentatively asked if there was anything she was hiding. Hearing this, Ju Cheon-suk was startled. Then he turned back to show that he didn't.
어디서 무슨 소리 들었길래?
그냥 갑자기
At this time, Joe's nephew came to report on his work. He was just about to leave. The two of them left together. It was clear that the nephew liked He. In order to take the same car, he even hid the car keys. He claimed that he was willing to be a driver. Unexpectedly, the upright secretary sits next to the driver. He likes to sit behind the passenger seat. The driver is just a driver. The two people in the car talked about blind dates. After hearing this, the nephew slammed on the brakes. He was unharmed, but the secretary hit her nose and it bled from both nostrils. On the other hand, young Gu-won couldn't find any information about transferring the mark, or a way to get it back. He was particularly frustrated. So what will happen next? The demon took the woman to a popular tourist spot in South Korea, saying he had something to do. This led the woman to have a slight misunderstanding.
보수적인 사람은 아닌데 우리가 처음이기도 하고 이런 공공장소에서 하는 거
However, before I could finish speaking, the demon forcefully threw me into the Han River. It turned out that young Gu-won hadn't found a way to restore the mark. He then had the butler thoroughly investigate He. The investigation revealed that He was not from a chaebol family. Her father was an engineer at Myri Group, developing home appliances. Her mother was a hairdresser at a hair salon. They married later in life. They finally welcomed their precious only daughter. But they both died in a car accident on He's 11th birthday. Afterwards, she was adopted by Ju Cheon-suk, the chairman of Myri Group. It's worth mentioning that He's father and Ju Cheon-suk co-founded Myri Group's electronics company. He herself lived a very hard-working life. She not only excelled academically, while still in university, I personally founded a dessert company. Within 7 years, it became the industry leader. I'm currently single. I've dated a few people before, but I was busy with my studies and work, so none of the relationships lasted long. My favorite food is sweet and sour pork, based on all the information I've gathered. The devil young Gu-won decides to do what he does best.
그게 맞네. 인간의 마음.
On the other hand, No Suwon was gloating over having thrown He's subsidiary into chaos, when the person herself suddenly appeared behind her. As the saying goes, it's not terrible to wear the same clothes, but the less attractive person is embarrassed. He overwhelmingly outshone No Suwon in appearance, and reminded her second sister that her eye for clothes was far better than her eye for men. She's subtly implying she found a sales associate. Actually, her main purpose this time is to make the stock price rise. She played her trump card right from the start.
아니면 나한테 관심 많은 거 아니야.
The photo shows No Suwon and the sales associate in a compromising position, and that's not even the threat. Just then, young Gu-won's phone call came through, saying he's suffering from serious after effects. It's serious enough to affect my livelihood, so I hope we can meet as soon as possible. They agreed to meet downstairs at the department store. After hanging up the phone, Ju-Hee threatened No Soo-on, saying that if her private life were reported, Future Fashion's corporate image would be ruined, and Ju Cheon-suk would be furious. She suggested that whoever created the mess should clean it up. That way, she wouldn't have to reveal the disgusting truth. And she warned her second sister, if she wants to play power games, then she should happily play with her older brother. Meanwhile, Ju Cheon-suk prayed devoutly to the priest, worried that she wouldn't be able to obtain Ju-Hee's forgiveness. It turns out that Ju Cheon-suk was at the scene when Ju-Hee's parents died. She sustained her leg injury in that accident. However, the truth of what happened remains unknown, but the truth of the matter is still unclear. That night, Ju-Hee arrived at the meeting place first. She turned around and saw Young Gu-won. In that instant, she heard her own racing heartbeat. Her heart beat faster and faster as the man approached. Her eyes could only see Young Gu-won, nothing else. She was completely stunned. After she came to her senses, Ju-Hee pulled out a wad of cash to compensate for the last meal. Young Gu-won casually accepted the envelope, saying he didn't want it. Let's take a look. Wow, that's hundreds of millions. But before it even got warm, Ju-Hee took it seriously and snatched it right back. Curious what she wants to get out of him. Young Gu-won said he felt powerless. Only Ju-Hee can solve this. Having said that, he grabbed the other person's hand. Cut to. Young Gu-won drives Ju-Hee somewhere. Along the way, he asks her to give him her hand. The devilish Young Gu-won steps on the gas with Ju-Hee's right hand. He quickly drives to find the signatory. He makes a gun shape with his hand. The devil's mark receives a response. At the same time, he made a snapping gesture at him. The signatory fell to the ground. The contract turned to ashes. No outstanding debts. The two came to the Han River. Young Gu-won suddenly asked her to hold her breath. Before Ju-Hee could think, he supported her shoulders. At that moment, Ju-Hee was certain Young Gu-won was about to kiss her. However, with a strange smile, he pulled Ju-Hee into the river. Actually, Young Gu-won thought the mark transfer happened in water. But after all that effort, there was no reaction. An exasperated Ju-Hee kicked him away. She struggled to swim upstream. Young Gu-won was left underwater, thinking like a thinker. After coming ashore, Ju-Hee was somewhat distraught. She had walked past death's door several times today, because Young Gu-won nearly drowned twice. And there was a madman, whose identity is unknown, who tried to kill himself. Ju-Hee left in a distraught state. Meanwhile, Ju Cheon-suk prayed for the courage to face the truth. Her eldest son revealed his cruel nature. Her eldest grandson didn't seem like a good person either. Although Lu Xiao-tion ended the internal strife, she still harbored resentment towards Ju-Hee. Even her seemingly innocent nephew wanted to vie for the position of chairman of the board. In other words, all these people had reason to eliminate Ju-Hee. Young Gu-won blocked all of the sulfuric acid. So what will happen next? The demon, having lost his powers, began to spontaneously combust. If they don't find a contractor soon, he will turn to ash. It turns out that the moment the assassin attacked Ju-Hee, the demon, Young Gu-won, rushed out and blocked the liquid. And he warned her, since you stole someone else's treasure, you should at least be responsible. At this time, Ju-Hee noticed Young Gu-won's burning body. Before she could call for help, Young Gu-won grabbed her hand. Not only his skin, but even his clothes were restored to their original state. Turning around, the police officer found that the liquid was sulfuric acid. From this, we can deduce that the killer may be an enemy. Ju-Hee recalls the bizarre death of team leader Cha, but she lied, claiming there was no one suspicious. After the investigation, Young Gu-won drove Ju-Hee home. On the way, he kept nagging her about not taking care of herself. Actually, he was worried that the mark would disappear. In fact, Ju-Hee didn't care at all about what Young Gu-won was like. Angel or devil, it doesn't matter. What's important is having amazing abilities. And the tattoo that drives those abilities is on me. Then she changed her expression. Actually, she guessed that Young Gu-won wanted to use her abilities. And that's why he kept appearing around her. However, she struggled to find a plausible reason. Ju-Hee thought that they had unexpectedly ended up on the same boat. We need to find a win-win solution. So I want to ask Young Gu-won to be my bodyguard. The noble devil, naturally, refused. Ju-Hee retorted that he wasn't protecting her, but the mark he longed for day and night. If I were to die, he would have a terrible headache, wouldn't he? Hearing this, Young Gu-won was startled, because he doesn't know what will happen. Ju-Hee admits her current situation is dangerous. She doesn't know who the other party is, and why they want her dead. And Young Gu-won needs the tattoo. She needs Young Gu-won. Young Gu-won looked at Ju-Hee. Then he looked at the tattoo. He didn't respond immediately. He arrived at Ju-Hee's doorstep. Young Gu-won refused the bodyguard offer. But his words didn't match his actions. He actually acted quite differently. He was very much like a bodyguard. After entering the house, news reported that the news crew chief committed suicide near a restroom. Ju-Hee immediately called Ju Cheon-suk to ask if anything unusual had happened at the company recently. This was because of the news report, and because she had received a call from team leader Cha yesterday, saying he had important news. Ju-Hee mistakenly thought it was extortion, so she didn't pay much attention. However, the news reported his suicide. Something feels wrong. After listening, Ju Cheon-suk told Ju-Hee to just manage the subsidiary company well. Then she hung up. She immediately called her secretary. She asked her to gather information related to team leader Cha's suicide, and the financial reports for the past 10 years. However, after reviewing all the information, Ju Cheon-suk explained that she was completely blind. On the other hand, the butler smelled the burning scent of an animal. Young Gu-won looked and realized it was his own spontaneous combustion. In other words, the demon's backlash had begun. Young Gu-won called Ju-Hee, telling her to wait at home. He said he would be there soon. They met. Young Gu-won readily agreed to be Do Do-hee's bodyguard, but the condition was that she had to go somewhere with him first. In a flash, the two arrived at the rooftop of a 100-meter-tall building, because this was the perfect spot to find the signatory. Before Do Do-hee could even cry, Young Gu-won had already found the signatory. Then, in a flash again, they landed in the intensive care unit. A mother was devoutly praying for her child, afflicted with a blood disease, to live, even if it were only for a day. Young Gu-won pushed aside the ward partition, claiming he could grant her wish. As long as she signed a contract with him, he guaranteed her child's health and safety for the next 10 years. At first, the mother naturally didn't believe it. Suddenly, the child's condition worsened.
빛의 시간 없으니까 직접 보여줘.
The child's breathing gradually became steady. All indicators returned to normal. Young Gu-won seized the opportunity to reveal the contract. By this time, 3 fingers were already burning. He made it clear that the mother must go to hell 10 years later. The mother wanted to ask for clarification, but Young Gu-won told her to decide immediately, or he would find someone else. Seeing this, Do Do-hee pleaded on her mother's behalf, hoping to give her mother time to consider. Before she finished speaking, her mother agreed to sign the contract. After this incident, Do Do-hee's attitude towards Young Gu-won changed. She bought her survival by using others' misfortune. She thought every moment he lived was built on the despair of others. But Young Gu-won believed he saved a family. At least the child. In short, their philosophies clashed. Do Do-hee no longer needed a devil as a bodyguard. Meanwhile, Ju Cheon-suk found out who hired the killer. She rebuked them, saying that those who commit wrongs must pay the price. However, although the person who hired the killer appeared outwardly submissive, they already planned to eliminate Ju Cheon-suk. That afternoon, while Do Do-hee was conducting business, she happened to see the child. She watched the family of 3 enjoying themselves happily. I finally understand why mom was willing to sign the contract. And what Young Gu-won did. At her adoptive mother's funeral, the adoptive daughter actually proposed to the devil. Marry me. What is going on? It turns out that Young Gu-won, to avoid the backlash, still became Do Do-hee's bodyguard. On my way home that evening, Do Do-hee received a text message from Ju Cheon-suk. I'll go ahead. See you in heaven. Do Do-hee thought it was another prank, but when she called back, no one answered. So she went to the flower garden with Young Gu-won. But upon entering, she discovered Ju Cheon-suk had stopped breathing. Do Do-hee was instantly panicked. She hurriedly begged Young Gu-won to save her adopted mother. Unfortunately, the devil couldn't bring the dead back to life. Do Do-hee wept uncontrollably after hearing this. Her mood was as wet as a rainy day. Soon, Ju Cheon-suk's funeral arrived as scheduled. All the relatives were crying their hearts out. Only the adopted daughter, Do Do-hee, couldn't shed a single tear. She remembered when her parents passed away, and Ju Cheon-suk came to offer condolences. She couldn't cry then either.
나 때문에 죽은 거니까 그깟 생일이 뭐라고. 내가 빨리 오라고.
Ju Cheon-suk approached Do Do-hee and questioned if she was a god, able to control the life and death of others. It's practically the same as dust floating in the air. Angry, Do Do-hee grabs Ju Cheon-suk's collar and they scuffle. She accidentally knocks off her sunglasses. The eyes behind the lenses have long since turned red. The reason Ju Cheon-suk did that was because she was afraid it would harm the child's health. Jo Jeezy's appearance pulled Do Do-hee back to reality. This person revealed. Ju Cheon-suk ordered the establishment of an oversight committee before her death. It's currently been suspended by the board of directors. Lu Xiaotian overheard their conversation. He told them to look at what the eldest son is doing. The directors are busy pledging their loyalty. They don't have time to worry about the oversight committee. He casually mentioned how their mother had sent the eldest son to jail for drunk driving. Then, she reminded Do Do-hee again. Don't think that just because you and Joe's nephew are both outsiders, you can stick together. Don't forget that he has Joe family blood in his veins.
너한테는 기계나 만지고 남의 머리나 만지고 그건 천한.
In short, with Ju Cheon-suk's passing, Lu Xiaotian no longer has anyone to fear. Just then, Lu Xiaotian's twins caused a disturbance. All those who came to offer condolences. Smiles were on the faces of family members and others. It didn't look like a funeral, but a party. Do Do-hee couldn't stand the atmosphere and chose to leave. She just happened to brush shoulders with the assassin disguised as security. He went straight into the monitor control room. Do Do-hee had just reached the flower garden when the grandson followed right behind her.
지어선 담배 냄새 싫어요.
할머니?
The eldest grandson said everything belongs to dad. Soon, it will all be his own. He openly stated his dislike for Ju Cheon-suk. He also called today a good day. Do Do-hee couldn't stand hearing this. The eldest grandson tried to attack. Young Gu-won appeared in time to defuse the situation. Scene change. All the relatives gathered in the living room waiting. The police officer came to report on the matriarch's cause of death. According to the police toxicology report, Ju Cheon-suk had taken diclofenac that day. She died of cardiac arrest. Hearing this, Do Do-hee stated that Ju Cheon-suk was allergic to that type of medication and would never take it. The police found discrepancies between the medicine jars and the medication at the scene. That's why they brought it up. At this time, the eldest daughter-in-law chimed in, suspecting it was a medical accident. Lu Xiaotian was curious if the medicine was prescribed by Dean Shui. How could such an oversight happen? Do Do-hee suddenly understood. If Team Leader Che's statement refers to evidence of someone's embezzlement, then the murderer would have killed Ju Cheon-suk to stop her from investigating further. In other words, the real killer was at the scene. The officer asked if anyone knew that Ju Cheon-suk was allergic to diclofenac. The officer asked who knew that Ju Cheon-suk was allergic to diclofenac.
그리고 여기 있는
The living room was terrifyingly quiet. Suddenly, the eldest son suggested announcing to the outside world that their mother died of a heart attack. All the relatives present unanimously agreed. Afterward, I anxiously went to the funeral, because the will was about to be read. Do Do-hee followed and frankly stated, Ju Cheon-suk did not die accidentally, but was murdered. But she didn't say what happened next.
너희들 중 너야? 너? 아니면
Ju Cheon-suk left a conditional will. Besides donating all real estate in Hanam-dong, he will transfer all the shares and operational rights of the group to his adopted daughter, Do Do-hee. But the condition is that she must register her marriage within 1 year of Ju Cheon-suk's death. If the condition is not met, the property will be donated to the Welfare Foundation. And he left a letter for each family member. Do Do-hee looked at the tattoo on her wrist. She warned everyone. If they want the property, they should kill her. Because she decided that even if it meant allying with the devil, we must also find out the truth. Having said that, she walked towards young Do-won. So what will happen next? The chaebol heiress, who just inherited hundreds of billions of won at the funeral, actually proposed to her bodyguard. However, the bodyguard, in front of nearly 100 guests, refused without a second thought. The scene was incredibly awkward. His reason was that he needed to keep his public and private life separate. Although the little episode between Do Do-hee and young Do-won is over, the relatives who didn't inherit anything are still angry. No Soo-cheon didn't expect to be tricked by his mother. He's arguing with No Suk-min to find a solution. But the inherited portion already exceeds the legal limit. Even if he files a lawsuit, he won't get a single penny. It turns out that 12 years ago, No Suk-min was caught drunk driving by the police. Ju Cheon-suk said that if you commit a crime, you must pay the price. This caused him to harbor resentment. He thinks his mother abandoned him. But looking at No Suk-min's expression, you can tell. This kid isn't convinced. On the other hand, the eldest grandson was still smoking cigarettes in the flower bed. He and his father have exactly the same personality. After leaving the funeral, Do Do-hee tried to cover up the awkwardness with various excuses. However, between the lines, her curiosity about his refusal was evident. To lighten the mood, she asked young Do-won to play a song. After arriving home, Do Do-hee said she wouldn't hold today's events against young Do-won, and without looking back, walked towards her apartment. Ju Cheon-suk left her letter in the car. But back at home, Do Do-hee grew angrier and angrier. She yelled, venting her frustration. Young Do-won, who was delivering the letter, was so scared he couldn't ring the doorbell. He heard threats more terrifying than the devil himself. Something about putting a rope around her neck and dragging her to the wedding venue, or using a tranquilizer gun used to capture elephants. Young Do-won, being a devil, was scared. He leaned against the wall and fled home with difficulty. He turned his head and the doorbell rang. It was his nephew, Jo. Because Do Do-hee wanted to investigate the cause of Ju Cheon-suk's death, a supervisory group had to be established. His nephew, Jo, advised her to give up, out of concern. But Do Do-hee had already made up her mind. I've long since cast aside my own safety. Besides, Jo's nephew advised Do Do-hee not to rush into things. Marriage doesn't necessarily have to be with someone you met through a blind date. Actually, Do Do-hee herself didn't know why she made such a decision. But it's certain that young Do-won saved her life twice. After their chat, Jo's nephew prepared to leave. I saved my number in She's emergency contact list under family. He'd just left. And then the headline news broke. The headline was the chaebol heir who was rejected at the speed of light. And young Do-won's name was blurred out. Things escalated quickly. Soon, young Do-won received a call from Do Do-hee. He demanded that they meet immediately. Do Do-hee mistakenly thought that her status was a burden to him. Accepting immediately would seem vulgar. But young Do-won truly didn't want to get married. He also didn't understand why she chose him. Do people speak their true feelings when they're anxious?
그럼 이유도 설명 못해 충동적인 행동에 내가 왜 맞장구 쳐야 되는데? 묻지도 따지지도 않고 결혼할 생각 원하면
This angered Do Do-hee, and she turned to leave. Young Do-won worried that she would be attacked with sulfuric acid again. So I decided to escort her home. Do Do-hee fell asleep on the way, lost in thought. She didn't wake up until we reached the apartment building. Young Do-won carefully put the letter back in his bag. He deliberately swayed the car to wake Do Do-hee. He used her loud snoring as an excuse. After entering the apartment, Do Do-hee proactively gave young Do-won her number. There was an entry for emergency contact/family. Then I opened Ju Cheon-suk's letter. Do Do-hee, if you receive this letter, it means I've left you alone again. I hope my death won't become your pain. One time of crying is enough. The place I've left you is a battlefield that doesn't allow tears. I, who seemed successful, have failed. I'm surrounded by a bunch of rotten people. If I take this position, I'll first find people who won't make me feel lonely and will support me. If I can't find them, I'll throw this position to those wolves as bait. No Suk-min didn't agree to the police's house search. He hastily cremated Ju Cheon-suk's body. Do Do-hee is confident she can do well on her own. The next day, young Do-won had a dream. He dreamt of fragmented memories from his time as a human. The butler believed the demon had lost its powers. That he was just an ordinary human. That's why his memories returned. More concerning than spontaneous combustion is the risk of accidents. Not to mention immortality. He should worry about when he might age. Hearing this, young Do-won was no longer calm. He seemed to have developed crow's feet. He insisted on reclaiming his own mark. How a straight-laced devil angered the little princess with one sentence.
나도 되게 좋아해. 육식주의자가 돼지고기 좋다고. 돼지랑 결혼하는 거 봐.
It turned out that the devil young Do-won was worried about aging. He took Do Do-hee's hand. But the bodyguard rejected the chaebol heiress. The proposal caused a huge stir. Do Do-hee doesn't want to ruin the company's image. The key is how she could be rejected. She wants to accept the advances of a man who has rejected her twice. Young Do-won reluctantly admits. Without his powers, he's just like a human. He slowly starts to age. In other words, he's been using Do Do-hee as a power bank. After learning the truth, she became even more unwilling. At the very least, she couldn't be held at any time he wanted. All day long, Young Gu Won constantly thought about his mark. But he was always rejected by Do Hee. As luck would have it, an old advertisement played in the elevator. He looked at the advertisement, floor in for A. He looked at the mark again. Only anxiously awaiting can describe how I feel right now. At this time, the secretary reported. The home security video has been obtained. Because Ju Cheon-suk's medicine was in her bag, Do Hee concluded that it must have captured who tampered with it. 202811011, but due to the excessive number of files 3020-10-22812111. Young Gu Won was just about to slack off. I was grabbed.
우린 한 배를 탔다는 거지.
The two of them watched for a long time. Young Gu Won was getting a little impatient. He felt that using this crude method to find the truth was inferior to using his own abilities to quickly ascertain the truth.
넌 그걸 왜 이제 얘기해?
Do Hee proactively offered her marked wrist for the demon to use. But Young Gu Won made two requests. After catching the culprit, she needs to continue cooperating until the mark is restored. Secondly, no matter where you are, you must always generously allow him to charge. Finally, under the devil's temptation, Do Hee agreed. With Young Gu Won's snap of his fingers, nothing happened in the office. This was met with Do Hee's disdain. However, sparks flew from his fingers. Nothing happened. Did my magic disappear? So, Young Gu Won snapped his fingers again. They whooshed down to the company warehouse. Standing in the narrow aisle, suddenly, they heard the employees gossiping outside. Some guessed that Do Hee and Young Gu Won were definitely dating. Because only those with a foundation of feelings. Only then might he propose. Some people think office romances are exciting. And others offer suggestions. Just have a meal together and you'll know. If they secretly hold hands under the table, etc., while hiding it from everyone. Young Gu Won and Do Hee, listening in the warehouse, blushed. Their fingers accidentally touched. Instant awkwardness. Restless. Surging emotions intertwined. They wanted to leave quickly. However, they made a mistake in their haste. They tried several times but couldn't grasp the wrist. Finally, Young Gu Won missed. A loud sound echoed. When the employees opened the warehouse, Young Gu Won carried Do Hee to the rooftop. It turned out he was identifying the real culprit based on their appearance. But there's something strange. He clearly saw the person's face. Young Gu Won suspected the real killer had plastic surgery. Actually, the murderer was wearing a mask. It's not really Young Gu Won's fault that he couldn't find him. That night, Do Hee discovered that the surveillance video had been tampered with. 20 minutes were inexplicably missing. At this time, Jo's nephew called. He informed her that the team leader's laptop had also been wiped clean. Turning around, the two of them went to the company dinner. Young Gu Won seized the opportunity and grabbed Do Hee's hand. Coincidentally, the female employee dropped her chopsticks. Bending down to pick them up, she saw this scene. Poor thing, she liked Young Gu Won for so long. After a few rounds of drinks, a male employee questioned Young Gu Won about why he rejected Do Hee. He then said the words from the beginning. Just because you like pork doesn't mean you have to be with a pig. Do Hee's face turned green with anger after hearing that. He shook off the hand holding him and left the small shop. Young Gu Won didn't know what happened. Why wouldn't he let him charge his phone? Do Hee was just about to explain. But when she turned around, he was gone. It turned out Young Gu Won was tired of the fluctuating emotions and preferred to just die. But then he thought again and worried about Do Hee's safety. Just then, Blackie's younger brothers came for revenge. Young Gu Won, having lost his abilities, picked up a newspaper. He feigned a move, then turned and fled. Do Hee was also worried about him. But she couldn't reach him. In the end, Young Gu Won was cornered in a pedestrian street. Just as the 200-year-old demon was about to meet his end, a whistle suddenly sounded. Yes, it was Do Hee who came here. Although her eyes widened in fear, she unhesitatingly pulled out her stun gun.
나는 경원에
Ling Qiao's stun gun was out of power. Do Hee then pulled out a gun. Young Gu Won, with his stun gun recharged, immediately regained his power. With the mark shining brightly, his injuries healed instantly. He quickly took care of his subordinates. But he knew in his heart that bodyguards can't fall in love with their employers. So what story will unfold next? Simply because a psychologist called him crazy, he was headbutted into a urinal by the Chabel's grandson. Then he was thrown into a stall, and the door was slammed against him repeatedly. His father is even more insidious. Taking advantage of his mother's recent death, he blackmailed the council members into supporting him. Because in this man's eyes,
힘이 없으면
the weak can only survive by clinging to the strongest and most powerful authority. It turned out that when the devil, Young Gu Won, was critically injured, Do Hee suddenly appeared, regardless of her own safety, restoring his abilities. Under the demon's overwhelming power, the younger brothers seeking revenge for their gang boss were easily dealt with. Unbeknownst to them, the whole process was filmed by the assassin. After Young Gu Won sent Do Hee home, his attitude changed. Without a word, he turned and left. Actually, he was putting on a brave face. A heart frozen for 200 years. I unconsciously found myself beating for Do Hee. Young Gu Won immediately rushed back to the office. He deduced where the problem lay. How could he possibly fall for a mere mortal? Could it be related to the mark? Meanwhile, Do Hee grew angrier and angrier. What was that disdainful look Young Gu Won gave her just now? It was clearly him who wanted to grab my wrist and save me. Once he was safe, he acted like he was invisible. It wasn't just me who felt that spark. He clearly felt it too. Do Hee said it didn't matter. But then she changed her mind and couldn't rest easy. So she immediately took a taxi and went to the Sun and Music Group managed by Young Gu Won. Now, it's bonus time. Do-he looked for a good excuse for this trip. While walking towards the office, suddenly, she sensed a murderous aura behind her. She quickly drew her gun and confronted the person behind her. It turned out to be the actor Chin, who loves demons. She recognized Do-he at a glance. She issued an order to leave, citing it was not performance time. However, Do-he, with a hint of provocation, told actor Chen that her relationship with young Gu-won was extraordinary. Then she left without looking back. When Do-he arrived at the office, nobody was there. She was immediately drawn to the room at the very back. Inside, tens of thousands of identical clocks were displayed. Strangely, each clock showed no later than 10 o'clock. Do-he marveled at young Gu-won's unique taste. I suddenly noticed something shiny on the bookshelf. But it was placed a little too high. Even if she stood on tiptoe, she still couldn't reach it. Wouldn't it be impolite to touch other people's things? Do-he thought she didn't care. Without realizing it, she noticed young Gu-won's necklace. She thought, shouldn't devils be afraid of crosses? However, young Gu-won mistook her for a woman with ulterior motives. The atmosphere suddenly became incredibly awkward. The actor Chin, who was eavesdropping outside, couldn't take it anymore. He acted very close to young Gu-won, in front of Do-he. Their words sounded like those of lovers. After actor Chin left, Do-he bluntly asked young Gu-won, "Why did you leave without a word just now?"
난 그냥 너랑 같이 있기 싫었을 뿐이야. 근데 이렇게 굳이 또 찾아와서.
Do-he stormed out of the office furious. She felt she had been incredibly presumptuous. However, young Gu-won, who had just spoken harshly, immediately called the butler and secretly instructed him to escort Do-he home. Meanwhile, the assassin notified the mastermind and left the video footage in a locker. Turning around, the mastermind instructed the killer to eliminate her immediately when young Gu-won wasn't around Do-he. So they did. The next morning, young Gu-won, as usual, drove Do-he to work, but they arrived separately and didn't interact, causing their colleagues to gossip. Holding hands last night, not speaking to each other today. They must have had a fight or something. In fact, young Gu-won wasn't focused on work either. He hid in the break room to drink coffee. But there's one person who can handle him. That's Secretary Yoon, whom everyone in the company fears. Meanwhile, a delivery man with an unclear appearance and very suspicious enters the office. He looks around, seemingly searching for a target. Just then, Do-he has to go out for a while. She just left the office when the delivery man follows her. So what will happen next? The Chabel's adopted daughter is tied up 100 meters in the air. The assassin whistles, admiring his prize. He calmly cuts the rope, just as the Chabel's adopted daughter is about to fall to her death. It turns out a suspicious delivery man slipped into the company that morning. The moment his hand reached for Do-he, Secretary Yoon knocked him down with a swift ah. DIF and young Gu-won rushed to protect Do-he. He anxiously asked if she was injured. The sudden concern left Do-he momentarily stunned. Secretary Yoon immediately pulled off the delivery person's helmet. Their head was knocked askew. However, after seeing their face, she realized it was young Gu-won's housekeeper. It turned out the housekeeper was worried about young Gu-won's condition. I felt bad about just showing up empty-handed and hanging around. So I thought I'd disguise myself as a delivery person. Because of his outburst, young Gu-won's carefully crafted indifference was completely ruined. While they were arguing, Do-he came with Secretary Yoon to apologize. But the moment she saw him, the butler instinctively assumed a defensive posture. He was truly terrified of being hit. Secretary Yoon apologized, but his attitude was as if the butler had done something wrong.
치료비는 물론 정신적 피해 보상까지 해드리고 싶은데.
그러실 필요
그럼 저 잊고 말고요.
보상은 됐습니다.
전 그러시다.
Unbeknownst to them, the real killer was watching everything unfold. Due to Ju Cheon-suk's sudden death, and the will's condition that Do-he must marry within a year. This left the group without a spokesperson. So the shareholders decided to elect No Suk-min as interim chairman. Actually, this was all orchestrated by No Suk-min. What surprised me was, his son was particularly angry when he heard the news. In the end, No Suk-min was elected interim chairman with over half the votes. After the meeting ended, No Soo-cheon warned Do-he, none of the directors will support her. So don't even dream of becoming the chairwoman.
안 됐네. 조만간 보게 될 텐데. 우리 당겨면 내가 가만히 있을 것 같아? 기대할게.
No Suk-min came over and stopped the argument. He also took the opportunity to advise Do-he as an older brother. Haste makes waste. Especially for something as important as marriage. You should take your time and find a suitable partner.
든든하네. 오래 걸리진 않을게요.
결혼식 잡히면 청첩장 보내라. 가족이니까.
There's a detail here. Chang-sun said to Do-he, "Your tattoo is pretty." Do-he had never mentioned it to anyone? So how did he know? Leaving the venue, Lu Xiutian really wanted to get close to young Gu-won, finding him both cool and charming. But young Gu-won wasn't interested at all. Zhou's nephew stayed by Do-he's side the whole time. And the fact that they're relatives. Their affectionate words made young Gu-won quite jealous. Zhou's nephew found out that 2 years ago, the group ordered ships from a company at a high price. However, not only are the ships missing, but the company that sold them has also gone out of business. This is a classic case of falsifying accounts. After discussing business, young Gu-won saw Zhou Jizi and Dao Shi talking. He felt a surge of anger. He involuntarily stole glances at her in the car. Do-he noticed his gaze. She frankly said she wouldn't be so presumptuous again. Young Gu-won also played hard to get. He said that would be best. The police tried every means, but couldn't trace the killer's whereabouts. Do-he thought only she could act as bait to bring this person to justice? Leaving the police station, the two immediately went to a restaurant and met Do-he's blind date. Her blind date was a prosecutor. Not only was he unattractive, But he was also an awkward lecher. He shouts out cheesy pickup lines, making himself seem romantic, but actually making people want to slap his mouth. Young Goo-won couldn't stand it anymore, so he played a little prank on his blind date. However, Do-hee didn't have time to play pranks with him. After the prosecutor finished dealing with his injuries, Do-hee proposed marriage immediately, because she needs a partner who can handle the table.
아무리 그래도 저놈은 진짜 아니지.
네가 무슨
These words left Young Goo-won speechless. In reality, this marriage is merely a transaction. For Do-hee, who the partner is, doesn't matter at all. On the way back, Do-hee instructed Secretary Yoon to prepare the necessary items for the wedding. Young Goo-won felt increasingly uncomfortable listening. He used the excuse of not wanting to see a sad expression. He forcefully grabbed her wrist. Young Goo-won would use his own methods to find the truth. In a flash, he appeared before the revenge subordinate. He forced him to immediately bring the person in the portrait. Naturally, the revenge subordinate wouldn't immediately comply. It just so happened that Young Goo-won had nowhere to vent his anger. A cup was seen slowly rising. It flew towards the subordinate. Then came a fork. This time, it grazed his cheek. Immediately, everything on the table began to float. Do-hee worried she might kill someone? Just as it was flying towards her younger brother, she broke free from his wrist. Do-hee didn't understand why Young Goo-won was so angry. However, Young Goo-won said the problem was her. Before he met her, his life was fine. But everything went haywire since we got involved.
그만두자. 넌 아주
Thus, the two parted ways. A short while later, Secretary Yoon took Do-hee home. Unbeknownst to them, the assassin followed her to the building. Do-hee suddenly heard music coming from the living room. She bravely opened the door. She didn't know who had put on the record. When Do-hee woke up again, she was already tied up 100 meters in the air. The assassin slowly cut the ropes. Just as she was about to fall, someone leaped and grabbed her wrist. And that person was the devil, Young Goo-won. This is the most unprofessional assassin I've ever seen. While he had knocked out his target, he somehow let her broadcast an emergency call. He waited for the other person to wake up, before slowly cutting the rope. Suddenly, the assassin heard a noise outside. His first reaction was to hide. Thus, thanks to his incredibly unprofessional actions, Young Goo-won appeared in time and grabbed Do-hee's wrist. However, before they could celebrate, the assassin suddenly returned. In a flash, the two of them appeared in the hallway. Coming to her senses, Do-hee tightly hugged Young Goo-won. She broke down and cried. This scene was witnessed by Jo's nephew, who had just arrived. A short while later, the three of them returned to the apartment. The door lock was broken. The assassin had also fled. Do-hee recalled. The killer seemed to enjoy being afraid, as if she were appreciating the whole process. Suddenly, she remembered her phone. She played back the security camera footage. She was surprised to find that the killer and the taxi killer looked different. But Young Goo-won noticed the wound on his neck. It was identical to the taxi killer's. She suspected that he had a different face. That's why the police couldn't find him. In other words, the killer used a disguise. After comforting Do-hee, Ji-ja called Young Goo-won to another room and questioned them about whether they were hiding something from him.
저게 무슨 자리거든. 난 도희의 유일한 편이니까. 걱정 마. 도도의 유일한 편은 그.
Meanwhile, Do-hee went out to the terrace to get some air. As she approached the railing, she involuntarily recalled what had just happened. She had a stress response. She realized she had taken death too lightly. She didn't know what true death meant. She felt the world she trusted was collapsing. She had become utterly and completely alone. After waking up tomorrow, anyone could be the killer. He would probably be lurking in the shadows, wearing a different face. Jo's nephew understood Do-hee's marriage proposal. Just then, Young Goo-won made the same proposal. For a moment, Do-hee didn't know how to choose. She said she needed time to think it over. The next day, Young Goo-won was unable to focus on work. Heehao's housekeeper came looking for him. The two of them went to the lobby on the first floor to slack off. Do-hee, meanwhile, found Xiao Cui, a colleague who loved playing tarot cards. She tried to find answers in the cards. She drew the Wheel of Fortune. It usually signifies a reunion or a reencounter. Although fate is what it is. It's like a wheel, repeatedly replaying within a framework. But the direction of rotation depends on one's will and wisdom. The 10 written on the Wheel of Fortune card symbolizes an ending and a brand new beginning. Meanwhile, Young Goo-won saw his nephew enter the company carrying a pot of flowers. He instantly became fully alert. The man walked into Do-hee's office. He gave her the flowers. But the atmosphere was especially awkward because of last night's proposal. Suddenly, Do-hee started laughing uncontrollably from embarrassment. Seeing this, Jo's nephew couldn't help himself either. This really agitated Young Goo-won outside.
질투하는 거야? 질투? 나 질투하고 그런 거.
Jo's nephew seized the opportunity. He promised that the proposal wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. When he heard Do-hee was going on a blind date, his heart even skipped a beat. Young Goo-won's proposal last night made me incredibly jealous. Only then did I realize my feelings for her. Do-hee frankly stated that she had always considered Ju's nephew as family.
진짜 가족이 되자. 지금 나한테 필요한 건 결혼이니까 가족.
That afternoon, Young Goo-won couldn't contain his curiosity. He asked Do-hee why she had listed him and Ju So-kun as emergency contacts. Do-hee didn't answer directly. I'm actually curious why Young Goo-won rejected me before, but now wants to get married. No reason. A short while later, they arrived at the groundbreaking ceremony for the group. No Suk-min looked very nervous seeing Do-hee. He even forgot his speech. Do-hee informed No Suk-min that she's getting married tomorrow. Because I'm in a hurry, I didn't print the invitation. As a family, you should be understanding, right? As Do-hee was preparing to leave, she discovered a worker with a wound on his neck. So, will the murderer be caught? And who will she marry? The groom suddenly interrupted the officiant's vows, unwilling to cherish the bride for a lifetime, and forced the bride to remove that word. Earlier in the car, young Gu-won admitted that he married Do-do-hee to prevent her from dying. So they decided to have a contract marriage. Each party would help the other achieve their goals. The deadline was set for the day both achieved their goals. During the wedding waiting period, Do-do-hee seemed to see Ju Cheon-suk. This person just kept nagging, complaining that such an important matter as her wedding dress couldn't be left to a secretary. Do-do-hee wanted Ju Cheon-suk to be the officiant, but she worried her speech would be too stiff.
거긴 어때? 지낼만해? 내가 어디 있는 줄 알아?
Do-do-hee heard that rich people can't go to heaven, but Ju Cheon-suk couldn't possibly go to hell either, because anyone who knows her will know that she's actually a pretty good person. So where did he go? Leaving me all alone here.
네 기억 속 내가 거기 말고 다른 데 또 갈 데가 어딨어?
Do-do-hee's eyes instantly welled up. Soon, the wedding officially began. The groom was none other than the devil, young Gu-won. The happiest and most celebratory were the butler and secretary Yoon. These two were competing to see who could clap louder. As for the family member, No Soo-cheon, the higher you fly, the harder you fall. Suddenly, Do-do-hee noticed No Suk-min's son, little Lou. His smile was unnervingly creepy, but the wedding was in progress, so she didn't think much of it. It was time for the photo session. A bystander suggested that the newlyweds share a kiss. Initially, young Gu-won refused. However, Do-do-hee reminded him. The contract stipulates that to the outside world, we must perfectly portray the image of an ideal couple. Since that's the case, young Gu-won cupped Do-do-hee's cheek and slowly leaned in. Just as their lips were about to touch, he stopped with his thumb in between. But it still made Do-do-hee's heart race and blush uncontrollably. Joe's nephew happened to see this scene. While they were taking individual photos, Joe's nephew asked if he was not good enough. Do-do-hee told him he was always a family member he could rely on. However, young Gu-won turned around and saw the two of them chatting and laughing. He immediately became unhappy.
자기야, 집에 가자.
A typical declaration of sovereignty. He warned his nephew Joe not to glare at other people's wives with resentment. After the wedding, as soon as the newlyweds arrived home, young Gu-won immediately shielded Do-do-hee behind him. He found the house in a mess. Thinking the killer had returned, he thought the assassin had come again. Actually, it's because I've been busy preparing for the wedding. Do-do-hee hasn't had time to clean up. Young Gu-won couldn't stand it anymore. He used magic to automatically clean the house. On the other hand, Joe's nephew was unwilling to accept this. He investigated the Sun Music Group, managed by young Gu-won. He unexpectedly discovered that the company was founded in 1977. Meanwhile, Do-do-hee recalled Xiao Lu's unusual behavior after Ju Cheon-suk's death, coupled with his creepy smile at the wedding today. She couldn't help but suspect him as the mastermind. After showering, young Gu-won and Do-do-hee met eyes. They both spoke nonsensically, embarrassed and wishing they could disappear. That night, although they slept in separate rooms, both had a restless night. The next morning, young Gu-won was woken by a noise. He stormed out of the room and saw his wife eating breakfast. His anger immediately subsided.
뭐 하는 거야, 집부터?
아침부터 너무
It was a weekend, a day off. Do-do-hee wanted to check on Xiao Lu, so she dressed up as an old lady. Unsurprisingly, she was met with young Gu-won's disdain. Whoosh. They instantly teleported to the men's restroom. Xiao Lu just happened to walk in. During the judo training earlier, he almost killed someone. The coach came to ask him why. However, this person doesn't think murder is a big deal. Do-do-hee and young Gu-won followed Xiao Lu all the way. They found that he was very alert. He specifically parked his car in the parking lot and then took the subway. He seemed to be deliberately concealing something. And then, whoosh. The two moved to a photo booth. Do-do-hee suspects young Gu-won is a fan of escape rooms, always being sent to such a strange place. They saw Xiao Lu open the public locker. Just then, the two of them seemed to have been discovered. Xiao Lu walked towards them step by step. However, for some reason, young Gu-won's magic failed. Listening to the others' footsteps getting closer and closer, young Gu-won recalled their contract marriage agreement. He suddenly cupped Do-do-hee's face. He couldn't help but kiss her. So, will they be discovered? The bride disliked the groom's excessive belongings. She unceremoniously kicked him out. It should be noted that they had been married for less than a day. Meanwhile, the eldest grandson walked towards young Gu-won and Do-do-hee. Snap. At the critical moment, the demon's magic disappeared. They could no longer teleport. At this crucial moment, young Gu-won cupped Do-do-hee's face and kissed her. The grandson didn't notice anything unusual. He lowered the curtain and left. However, the contract was fulfilled with the kiss. The couple didn't know what to say. The atmosphere was incredibly awkward. Then Do-do-hee remembered following the grandson. She headed towards the public lockers first. Young Gu-won was suspicious. He picked up the sticker photo he had just taken. He couldn't help but reminisce. There was nothing in the locker. Suddenly, Choi Sang-gung appeared behind them. This person looked strangely dressed. Seeing this, young Gu-won pulled Do-do-hee and tried to leave. It's starting to flicker. Choi Sang-gung muttered to herself. It will eventually be extinguished. Young Gu-won thought of her as a person whose soul was lost, acting abnormally, and left without further thought. Exiting the subway, he felt a little uneasy. He used his magic on a flower bud. The flower bud bloomed instantly, indicating everything was normal. Unbeknownst to them, the flower withered instantly after they left. The two followed Chang-sun to his doorstep. Do-do-hee wanted to discuss their next plan. Looking at young Gu-won's lips, she involuntarily recalled their recent kiss. Her cheeks instantly flushed. After returning home, they tried to figure out why their magic had failed. Suddenly, Young Gu Won remembered. The day the mark was transferred, his abilities had also suddenly become unresponsive. It almost caused me to be hit by a car and die. He concluded that the problem was with Do Hee. Do Hee, upon hearing this, thought he was blaming her. If you find it troublesome, then don't do it. Do you think I enjoyed cooperating with you just now? Young Gu Won, so you're unhappy? Do Hee, are you happy then? That statement sounded somewhat ambiguous. Young Gu Won found an excuse to avoid her. Do Hee, realizing what happened, shyly covered her face. Meanwhile, Joe's nephew discovered a young Gu Won in an old photograph from the last century. In a group photo of the founder of the Settle Group. At that time, young Gu Won was moving important belongings into his new home. There were so many belongings that even the living room couldn't hold them all. Do Hee immediately pulled him into the bedroom for a private conversation. The house is for 2 people to live in. Unnecessary belongings must be moved out. Ultimately, they couldn't reach an agreement. This led to him being driven out. Young Gu Won, for the sake of his devilish pride, didn't plan to go back. At this time, the housekeeper informed him that the actor Chen disappeared after learning about the marriage. I hope Young Gu Won can come forward and look for him. On the other hand, Joe's nephew called Do Hee, hoping to talk privately about something important. When he came to the house, Young Gu Won happened to be in the car. Joe's nephew tentatively asked Do Hee how well she knew her fiancé before the wedding. He didn't have much to know either. He pulled out a yellowed photograph from his bag. It was taken in 1977 at the Xianli Theater. It showed a young Gu Won. Seeing that his nephew had discovered evidence of the devil, Do Hee concluded that the man in the picture was the former chairman of Xianli Group, Young Gu Won's grandfather. He explained about the strength of their genes. Only then did the matter pass without incident. Joe Jeezy left and found Young Gu Won searching for a signal in the garage. So he went up to him and invited him out for a drink. Joe Jeezy frankly stated that there were many secrets between Young Gu Won and Do Hee that he didn't know about. He speculated that he wasn't human at all. In short, he was very suspicious. And I also find him a little annoying. So I plan to keep a close eye on him from now on. Once I find out he might harm Do Hee, I definitely won't let him off the hook.
가만히 있지 않아. 비밀을 파헤쳐야죠. 그리고
Young Gu Won felt he had gained another fan. Being too popular is sometimes a headache. After returning to the company, Young Gu Won told the butler about his unstable magical powers. The butler thinks his abilities are malfunctioning. It might be related to his humanization. The longer he's been without the mark, the more his memories return. Young Gu Won thought that made sense. He realized he'd been acting strangely lately. He'd been experiencing many unnecessary emotions. He guessed that the mark would return to his wrist. His abilities and emotions should be completely restored. A man who's only been married for a day dares to come home so late at night. He was caught red-handed by his wife. However, he made an excessive request. Meanwhile, an assassin secretly slipped into the Xianli Group office. First, he planted a bug under the table. Then he set his sights on the devil's instruction manual. On the other hand, what Young Gu Won called recharging was actually him holding Do Hee's wrist. He was worried that losing the mark for too long would make him fully human. Do Hee was thinking about not using her magic power carelessly, but what she said was, you should be more restrained. This made Young Gu Won feel a little awkward. He urged her to go to sleep quickly. But I can't sleep holding hands like this. Turns out I was overthinking. Young Gu Won woke up first. He turned and gazed at Do Hee and pretended to be asleep when Do Hee turned over. Undeniably, the devil developed feelings. He fell for the woman before him. While Young Gu Won was lost in thought, Do Hee finally woke up. She looked at Young Gu Won across from her, too nervous to breathe. Just then, her secretary called. It turned out that many bloggers were spreading rumors, claiming that the day Ju Cheon-suk passed away coincided with the date of the last revision of her will. They suspected Do Hee of murdering her adoptive mother for her inheritance. News swept across the platform like wildfire. Even reporters joined in and started writing reports. Actually, at the wedding, the company employees heard that the masterminds behind this incident were likely No Suk-min and Lu Xiutian. The purpose was clear: to prevent Do Hee from becoming the group's decision-maker. Ju's nephew suggested that he should plead with the board members and try to win over those who have close ties with Ju Cheon-suk. Young Gu Won, however, thought it would be better to find the source of the rumor directly. Ultimately, Do Hee followed her husband's advice. Joe's nephew had just left the office when Do Hee asked Young Gu Won to take her somewhere. Immediately afterward, the secretary discovered that the two were not in the office. When Joe's nephew heard this, I'm completely shocked. He was clearly just here a moment ago. Do Hee found No Suk-min. She directly confronted him, saying she already knew his plan. However, No Suk-min thinks that as long as most people believe it, then it becomes the truth.
지효사가 항상 그랬죠. 내가 악마
It turns out that in the hit-and-run case years ago, he knew the victim was a person. He deliberately drove into them. From then on, the eldest son and Do Hee completely fell out over power struggles. Whoosh! Young Gu Won and Do Hee appeared behind the rumormonger. After clarifying that his wish was for wealth and fame, the three of them instantly teleported to the South Korean treasury. Next, they just had to wait for the bank to open. The gossiping YouTuber would be arrested as a criminal in the act. If that happens, my reputation will be completely ruined. He'll be so scared he'll beg for mercy. That'll solve the media storm. Just then, the butler called to inform me that the devil's user manual is missing. Suddenly, Young Gu Won appeared behind him with Do Hee. Do Hee is surprised to discover a secret about Young Gu Won's name.
정선.
주변이 죄다 손버릇 안 좋은 인간들 뿐이야, 진짜.
너 다음 이름은?
Do Hee is curious about what book was lost. The butler confesses. It records the origin of the demon, the uses of its power, and how to restrain it. Unbeknownst to them, their conversation is overheard by the assassin. This person seems to have found the demon's taboo. I can't kill the living. I can't resurrect the dead. And I can't stop natural disasters. If I interfere, my demonic body will turn to ash. Young Gu-won searched everywhere but couldn't find him. He suspected it was Joe's nephew. After all, this person already suspects me. Turning around, Young Gu-won sent Do Do-hee home. He attended the Xianla group's performance. Meanwhile, the police arrested Do Do-hee on suspicion of murdering Ju Cheon-suk. The news quickly reached Young Gu-won. He immediately rushed towards the police station.
많이 아프시죠?
The assassin kicked Young Gu-won down, stepping hard on the dagger. So, what will ultimately become of Young Gu-won and Do Do-hee? The demon, stripped of his powers, is ambushed, just as the assassin prepares to deliver the killing blow. Young Gu-won finally catches a glimpse of the assailant's face. Soon, Young Gu-won is rushed into surgery. His injuries are very serious. Meanwhile, news of Young Gu-won's attack reaches the police station. Do Do-hee pleads with the police chief to let her see her husband. The chief knows in his heart that Do Do-hee didn't kill Ju Cheon-suk, coupled with her grief-stricken appearance. He finally breaks the rules and agrees to let her sneak out. Meanwhile, despite the doctor's best efforts, Young Gu-won dies from excessive blood loss, and his heart valves are severely damaged. I estimate he won't make it through the night. Meanwhile, Do Do-hee rushed to the hospital and into the ward. Before she could even properly look at Young Gu-won, actress John rushed in, accusing her, saying it was all her fault, that she killed the chairman. The butler explained the reason. He kept everyone except family members out. Do Do-hee immediately placed Young Gu-won's hand on the mark. It happened to be seen by Zhou's nephew outside the door. After waiting for a while, Young Gu-won showed no signs of recovery. Seeing this, Do Do-hee gradually became nervous. She suspected that she had arrived too late. Or maybe he really is dead. Thinking this, she dared not continue. And she constantly blamed herself. Do Do-hee cried on Young Gu-won's body. At that moment, the mark lit up. Hearing the voices, Do Do-hee was very shocked. However, Young Gu-won found her crying amusing. So amusing that he didn't want to die. But because my magic power failed, my body only recovered half. Do Do-hee wanted to call a doctor, but Young Gu-won grabbed her. He held her tightly in his arms, begging to be recharged like a spoiled boy. Do Do-hee understood that he needed her most right now, so she tacitly allowed it. It happened to be seen by actor Chen. He left the ward, very angry. As luck would have it, Jo Jeezy also witnessed this scene. Head court lady Choi looked at the waning moon in the sky, and realized that she had still saved him. She didn't know that doing so would threaten his life. After a short while, Joe's nephew urged him to return to the police station. Although Do Do-hee was still worried, she had to do it. Actor Chen always aimed to be Young Gu-won's partner. But he suddenly realized someone had cut in line ahead of him. That night, Young Gu-won had a nightmare. He dreamt he was surrounded by a raging fire. My body spontaneously combusts. I'm always lingering in the deepest pain. Suddenly, he woke up with a start. On the other hand, the results of the police search warrant are out. It cannot be proven that Do Do-hee murdered Ju Cheon-suk. She was immediately released. The injured Young Gu-won had the butler fetch him some water. Room temperature won't do, it has to be iced. And a straw needs to be in it. I just took a sip and now I want a snack. After the snack, my back itches. Anyway, I feel like nothing is interesting. Suddenly, Do Do-hee walked into the ward. As soon as Young Gu-won saw her, he immediately jumped out of bed. That heartfelt joy was all over his face. But Do Do-hee worried about his health. She immediately helped him lie back down on the hospital bed.
이제 집에 가자. 밖에 있는 저놈들 귀찮아서라도 여기 못 있겠어.
그래도 치료 받아야지.
너랑 있는
To outsiders, this was definitely a display of affection. To be honest, Do Do-hee was also stunned for a moment. On the other hand, Joe's nephew seemed to have figured something out. What kind of relationship do Young Gu-won and Do Do-hee have? The key should be that tattoo. Jong-sun received a message from the killer. The message said Young Gu-won saw his face. He's probably coming for revenge. That night, the couple were charging their devices at home. But the mark didn't light up. It didn't even flicker. Do Do-hee suggested increasing their skin-to-skin contact. Maybe that way, it would charge faster. Young Gu-won thought it made sense. At this moment, they clearly heard each other's heartbeats. Do Do-hee explained that she had no choice but to do that to charge. They both maintained that position and slept until the next morning. However, when Do Do-hee woke up, she remembered the actor's words, and unconsciously retracted her outstretched hand. And on top of worrying about Young Gu-won's health, I planned to let him rest at home. But Young Gu-won took advantage of the situation and hugged me. He wanted to recharge for another 5 minutes. Cut to 4 people are in a car heading to the company. Do Do-hee proactively placed Young Gu-won's hand on her wrist. Didn't you say you couldn't recharge in front of others before? We're officially married now. Those words swept away Young Gu-won's previous gloom. She said the most insincere words to protect the one she loved.
넌 날 더 이상 지켜줄 수 없어. 너 자신조차 지키지 못할 정도로.
Apparently, my colleagues heard that the CEO of Sun and Moon Group was coming. Before they finished speaking, Do Do-hee and the others walked into the company. The CEO was seen wearing a handsome suit, walking with strong, confident strides. He rushed in energetically. Suddenly, a colleague set off a firecracker. Young Gu-won immediately shielded Do Do-hee in fright. Everyone recovered and realized Secretary Yoon was holding the startled CEO. During the morning meeting, the team leader reported that the defamation matter had been resolved. Coupled with the attack on Young Gu-won, the negative public opinion completely reversed. The netizens who had been insulting her before also started attacking someone else. Secretary Yoon thought that this way, no one would oppose Do Do-hee becoming the chairman. After the meeting, His colleagues brought out Young Gu Won's favorite cake to celebrate his safe discharge from the hospital. Just as Young Gu Won was about to blow out the candles, his colleagues threw some confetti. It was just ignited by the candle flame. The unburnt ribbon reminded him of the natural scenes in his dream. The formidable demon, Young Gu Won, was actually a little scared. The butler noticed his unusual behavior. He immediately pulled him to a secluded corner, concerned about why he was so frightened. However, Young Gu Won refused to admit it. He also ordered the butler to return to the fairyland.
그냥 도도한테 일러서 데리고 다니지 말라고 해야겠다.
Finally, with the butler's friendly reminder, Young Gu Won confessed to having a self-immolating nightmare. The burning sensation in his fingertips felt incredibly real, making him experience human fear. Meanwhile, Actor Chin found Du Du-hee and warned her not to exploit Young Gu Won's weakness. Please let him go. After all, Du Du-hee almost lost her life. In the end, I advised her to solve her own problems. These words struck Du Du-hee deeply. Meanwhile, the housekeeper discovered that an hour of surveillance footage was missing on the day the book was stolen. The same thing happened on the day of the attack. The other party installed malicious software to interfere with the video recording. In other words, they knew Young Gu Won's true identity. Young Gu Won had just returned to the company when he was embraced by Actor Chen. Du Du-hee saw this, but said nothing. While seeing Actor Chen off, she plainly stated that she already knew about his weakened powers, and she reminded Young Gu Won that everything was weakened because of Du Du-hee.
그래서 자꾸 인간이 되는 거야. 그 여자 때문에 자꾸 인간적인 감정을 느끼니까. 그 여자를
That night, Du Du-hee couldn't sleep. She doubted whether what she did was right. The fight clearly had nothing to do with Young Gu Won, but she almost lost her life because of it. If she gave up now, she would feel sorry for Ju Cheon-suk.
죽은 사람은 억울할 거 없어. 남은 네가 억울했으면 그렇지.
Du Du-hee must feel wronged because she lost something precious. But my family doesn't even know who the murderer is. Ju Cheon-suk told Du Du-hee that she has a new family now. I can't lose my new family because of someone who's already passed away. Besides, I should make the best choice for myself. I should consider what's best for the person I truly love. That's also for my own good.
그럼 주여사, 우리 주여사를 위한 선택은?
널 위한 선택이 날 위한 선택이야.
Du Du-hee made up her mind. She immediately called her nephew, Joe. The next day, at the board of directors election, Joe's nephew was late. Du Du-hee announced that she was withdrawing her candidacy for chairperson, essentially conceding to No Suk-min. After the meeting, Du Du-hee told her relatives that she would let bygones be bygones. She would also give up the inheritance, hoping the conflict would end there. No Du-kyung was very angry after hearing this, but No Suk-min was relieved that Du Du-hee had made a wise decision. After everyone left, Young Gu Won immediately grabbed Du Du-hee. He didn't understand why she suddenly made this decision. Du Du-hee gritted her teeth. She lied, claiming she was tired of the backstabbing and fighting. She didn't want to live in constant anxiety and fear. She couldn't even go to work or take a walk alone. She wanted to return to her peaceful life of the past. Young Gu Won knew it was all a lie. However, Du Du-hee threw his hand away. She had said those insincere words at the beginning. Young Gu Won was very sad. He painfully crouched on the ground. The camera pans. He locked himself in the company. He thought a lot about what had happened these days. Actually, Du Du-hee told Ju Suk-hoon her thoughts last night. She thought giving up everything would bring happiness. Jo Jiazi wondered if she was doing this to protect Young Gu Won.
더 이상 내 사람들이 잃고 싶지 않아.
After a while, Young Gu Won found Jo's nephew. He questioned him about Du Du-hee's motives. Jo's nephew's temper flared up. He made it clear that everything was for Young Gu Won. After hearing this, Young Gu Won immediately went home to talk to Du Du-hee. But I searched everywhere and couldn't find her. I called her, but her phone was on the table. Turning around, Young Gu Won rushed into the flower bed and loudly told Du Du-hee, "If you gave it up for me, then muster your courage and fight again. Make the best choice." That's truly for his own good. However, Du Du-hee revealed that Ju Cheon-suk and her parents are all dead. Everyone she loved is dead.
나 때문에 너도 죽을 거야.
상관없어.
Until this moment, Young Gu Won finally admitted even his feelings for Du Du-hee. It will make oneself insignificant. Yet she remains an irresistible fate for me. The sweetest episode of the Korean drama My Devil is here. Young Gu Won and Du Du-hee share a passionate kiss. Conveniently, it's just the automatic beverage dispensing time. Under the artificial rain, the two express their affection freely. Just then, the mark suddenly lights up. The rapidly falling water droplets all stopped in midair. Young Gu Won's abilities returned. Du Du-hee happily burrowed into his arms. That night, Young Gu Won and Du Du-hee did what newlyweds do. The next morning, Du Du-hee shyly covered her head as soon as she woke up. Young Gu Won suggested they go out for breakfast. This statement shocked Du Du-hee. Don't demons skip breakfast? Young Gu Won wasn't sure either. He suspected he had become human. The two arrived at the restaurant where they first met. The demon was gradually growing fond of the bustling life. A familiar voice suddenly came from behind. The prosecutor was showing off to his blind date. Once, a Chaeble's heir fell in love with him at first sight. She persistently pressured him to get married. But the righteous prosecutor didn't want to become a puppet of the Chaebel, so he resolutely refused. Young Gu Won couldn't stand it anymore. He interrupted the man's speech. The prosecutor saw Du Du-hee. He escaped with his blind date. Young Gu Won, however, couldn't swallow his pride. He decided to use his power to teach the prosecutor a lesson, to ensure he wouldn't dare to gossip about his wife again. But Du Du-hee thought it was best to let it go. After all, she was the one who proposed marriage. She never expected the formidable devil to act so childishly. Young-gu-won didn't like this. He reminded him of the company anniversary today. We don't have to work. Then the two sat on a park bench. They exclaimed how great it was not to have to work. Young-gu-won wondered what humans do when they're dating. He thought carefully for a moment. It's mostly eating meals and going shopping. Nothing special.
나랑 하는 거?
Suddenly, Young-gu-won saw a couple riding a tandem bicycle. Thinking of the word double, he insisted on riding the swan boat with He. They rode around and around. Their faces were filled with happy smiles. Then Young-gu-won saw another double swan boat. He also wanted to try it with He. Anyway, anything involving double. He wanted to do it with He. What's important is that He didn't find it childish. Instead, she was willing to try it with him. They played until they were tired. Sitting by the river, admiring the sunset. Young-gu-won said he hadn't realized before that humans, though insignificant, also have a lovely side. Just then, he heard the girl behind him call her boyfriend darling. Mimu's eyes almost popped out. So he tentatively asked his wife to call him that too. He showed a look of disgust and refused.
미쳤나봐.
뭐가 미쳤지?
Seeing that he wasn't going to speak, the devil got angry again. Unbeknownst to them, someone was secretly filming them. That evening, Young-gu-won and He were just leaving the stairs. I just heard the music the killer played when he committed the crime. As the sound got closer, He unconsciously recalled what happened that night. It turned out to be the neighbor's ringtone. Young-gu-won saw how much the incident affected He. So after entering the house, he proactively played that song and invited her to dance. It's called the blues. The most important thing in swing dancing is trust in your partner. After a short while, he seemed much happier. Young-gu-won told her, "Let's make this song our theme song from now on." He didn't say anything. She just buried her head in Young-gu-won's arms. It turned out that the person secretly taking photos was no Sucheon. She spent the whole day watching Young-gu-won and He eat, drink, and play. She didn't get a single useful piece of evidence. And she suffered quite a bit. Young-gu-won tried to stop He from giving up the inheritance. He wanted to find the mastermind behind it all. However, He disagreed. Because that would mean starting all over again. Naturally, Young-gu-won couldn't understand.
나를 위한 선택이 나를 위한 선.
Young-gu-won asked after listening, "Aren't you curious what he looks like? If I give up now, I'll never be able to escape this fear for the rest of my life." He thought carefully for a moment and decided to just take a look at the killer's face. Saying this, she revealed her wrist. However, Young-gu-won's magic failed again. This scene happened to be witnessed by Joe's nephew who just walked in. He asked He privately, "Will you regret giving up your inheritance?" He answered without hesitation, "No." Cut 2. Young-gu-won arrived at the police station. The police drew a sketch of the perpetrator based on his description. That night, to celebrate the return to a peaceful life, he asked Secretary Yoon to drink. A short while later, Young-gu-won received a call from his wife.
도도해 여기 나.
His wife, who had never called him honey before, called, "Honey, where are you?" Young-gu-won was shocked when he arrived. Secretary Yoon and He were completely drunk. She was even making bottle-blowing sounds at the bottle. The two drunkards gave Young-gu-won quite a headache. He had just taken 2 steps forward when He suddenly started crying, feeling sorry for Secretary Yoon, apologizing for making her work overtime so often. Then, without reason, she burst into laughter, laughing so hard you could see her tonsils. Young-gu-won stood there, petrified. "I don't know what to do. Let the two of them go crazy." Young-gu-won immediately called the butler for help. After a while, the butler and Secretary Yoon left the bujangmaka. Young-gu-won carried He and walked home. He muttered to herself, "I'm finally free today." But she also felt very guilty. "I feel so guilty towards Ju Cheon-suk."
그래. 근데 지금 이게 몇 바퀴째인지 알아?
그건 모르지.
I don't know how long it took. Young-gu-won settled the sleeping He. He couldn't help but sit by the bed and sigh. He, who gives her all to everything she does, even gives her all to giving up. Meanwhile, beat 60 number of views. The police used technology to identify the killer. Meanwhile, the mastermind behind the scenes has appeared. He is No Suk-min, the son of Ju Cheon-suk. To avoid being traced, No Suk-min burned the killer's body. It turns out that Ju Cheon-suk had discovered her son's actions, but No Suk-min showed no remorse. Instead, he blamed his mother for bringing it upon herself. Afterward, the painkillers were replaced with allergy medication. Ju Cheon-suk wrote in No Suk-min's suicide note, "He will pay for what he did. And I will atone for it." Now, the devil's instruction manual is in No Suk-min's hands. He feels he's getting closer and closer to his goal. The next day, the police arrested the murderer. They discovered that his residence had been burnt down. A dagger was also found stuck in the door. He immediately relayed this news to Young-gu-won and He. Young-gu-won looked at the dagger and recalled his own stabbing. He seemed to have an idea. When he left the police station, it just so happened that Joe's nephew felt, so he let this person take He home for him. Young-gu-won immediately returned to the office. Eventually, under the table, he discovered the bugging device. In other words, because the assassin's identity was exposed, the mastermind chose to eliminate the witness. On the other hand, Joe's nephew asked how much he trusts Young-gu-won, implying he suspects him of killing the murderer.
그럴 사람 아니야.
저 도희야.
오빠, 정거는 나랑.
Meanwhile, Young-gu-won heard a ticking sound. He went into the contract clock and discovered that all time had stopped. He immediately went to the hospital to inquire about the child with leukemia. Before he finished speaking, he saw the child's symptoms worsen. He then realized The demon's power wasn't malfunctioning, but had truly disappeared. Young Gu-won immediately found Choi Sang-gung and asked her if she knew anything about him. You've completely become human now. The two arrived at an upscale bar. Everyone there greeted Lady Choi warmly. Young Gu-won didn't understand. People usually judge by appearances. How could they be so welcoming to a beggar? In reality, to others, Lady Choi looked like a wealthy woman in her expensive attire. Young Gu-won thought this wasn't an appropriate place to talk. Unexpectedly, Chief Lady Choi snapped her fingers. They arrived at a desert. This person knew the demon disliked this, so she snapped her fingers repeatedly. The scene kept changing. Young Gu-won was very surprised. He was very curious about the identity of the person before him. Chief Lady Choi frankly stated that she taught the demon its abilities. To put it simply, it's a god. Young Gu-won didn't care about that. He only wanted to recover his own abilities. However, the god frankly stated that it couldn't be done, because the person whose abilities were taken wasn't her. The abilities transferred to an unsuitable body. Their disappearance is only natural. And the demons who lose their powers will disappear. The way to regain power is simple. Just by letting Do-Do-He die, it can be restored. So what story will unfold next? Between two people who love each other. If one must die. If the choice is yours, how would you choose? So the gods warned Young Gu-won that as long as Do-Do-He dies, the demon's power will be restored. But if she's still alive by the night of the full moon, the mark will completely disappear, and the demon will spontaneously combust and perish. Young Gu-won didn't understand why the gods would treat him and Do-Do-He this way. Actually, even gods cannot control everything. Although she is responsible for setting the rules of the universe, humans don't live by the rules. Instead, they make choices according to their own will. That's why countless anomalies occur. On the other hand, two people who haven't found true love ended up together. Actor Chen revealed Young Gu-won's true identity to Zhou Zi, and remind him to incite human desires and tempt them, thus capturing their hearts. Those are the methods of demons. Meanwhile, the deity emphasized once more that, once the night of the full moon arrives, the gears of fate will cease to turn. A choice had to be made then. Young Gu-won returned home, and found that Do-Do-He had made him a cake. It turned out she noticed that the demon seemed to envy everyone celebrating the holidays. So she practiced making a birthday cake. She wrote Young Gu-won's name on it as she said this. He didn't know whether it was a gesture of moving sentiment or farewell. Young Gu-won hugged Do-Do-He from behind. However, Do-Do-He immediately realized something bad had happened. He left so suddenly just now. Where did he go? Young Gu-won didn't have the courage to tell the truth. He just made up an excuse to get out of it. Do-Do-He naively thought everything was alright. She turned around and fed him a bite of cake. I didn't expect to receive such high praise from Young Gu-won, but he wouldn't let me try it.
이거는 이렇게 먹기 아까우니까 우리 그냥 이렇게 눈으로만 먹자. 눈으로 이렇게.
Young Gu-won immediately reassured me, saying he really liked the salty cake. Do-Do-He playfully told him to eat it all. Then she scooped a spoonful and offered it to his mouth. That evening, the two sat on the terrace. Young Gu-won asked what Do-Do-He would most want to do if the world ended tomorrow. Do-Do-He rested her head on Young Gu-won's shoulder. She expressed a desire to stay home with him all day, sleep in late first, then crack silly jokes with him, as if the days would last forever. Young Gu-won asked if there was anything else. Besides that, Do-Do-He also wanted to travel to every corner of the world.
무슨 하루가 이렇게 길어?
아니, 나랑 하는 거 말고 혼자서 하는 거 없어?
없어. 마지막인데 너랑 같이 있어야지.
The two nestled close to each other, until Do-Do-He fell asleep. Only then did Young Gu-won dare to speak his mind. He was most afraid that Do-Do-He would disappear from this world. After settling Do-Do-He, Young Gu-won sat beside the bed, and muttered to himself that he was going far away. In her dream, Do-Do-He suddenly grabbed Young Gu-won's hand. Sleepily, she blurted out that she would definitely find him. Young Gu-won dejectedly went outside for some air. He looked up at the almost full moon. He found God again, saying he wanted to break the rules. He and Do-Do-He both had to live. God picked up the dice and mocked Young Gu-won, because the rule is that one side wins, and the other side must lose. But Young Gu-won felt that one must struggle fiercely to know the outcome. He even suggested a gamble. If he regained his abilities, and Do-Do-He wasn't dead, then it would mean the gods had lost. He threw the dice onto the table. The gods stared intently. The result was 2 ones. Immediately afterward, Young Gu-won returned to his office. He asked the butler what time he and Do-Do-He fell into the Han River. The butler recalled it was midnight. After confirming the time, Young Gu-won instructed the butler that if he didn't return, he must absolutely take over as chairman. Then, sell all of his belongings. Use the money to pay off the new car loan. The next morning, Young Gu-won told Do-Do-He that tonight is a full moon night. The same night the mark was transferred. It can return to its owner then. Do-Do-He happily wanted to go on a honeymoon with Young Gu-won. So, will he succeed? The K-drama A Deal with the Devil is about to reach its climax. Do-Do-He was critically injured in an accident and was near death. Young Gu-won was caught in a fire while trying to rescue her. The big boss took over as chairman of the board. It turned out that the butler was very upset when he learned that Young Gu-won might be killed. He happened to be seen by the actor, Mr. Chen. After a friendly discussion, he learned the truth. Meanwhile, Young Gu-won went to the police station. First, I clarified that I didn't kill the assassin myself. Then, I speculated on the meaning of the dagger in the corpse. It wasn't a warning to me, but a message for Do-Do-He that she's in danger. So I wanted to ask the officer to help ensure her safety. Meanwhile, Actor Chen found Do-Do-He and made it clear that if Young Gu-won's attempt to restore the mark fails, I'll die in her place.
진가영 씨, 이게 지금 무슨 말인지. 오늘 밤 파토가 돌아오지 않으면 이 사장은 죽어.
But if Do-Hee dies, the mark will return to young Gu-won. Before he finished speaking, Actor Chin gave Do-Hee a bottle of poison, begging her to save the chairman. Just then, young Gu-won found them here. She questioned what Actor Chen was doing. Meanwhile, Do-Hee just wanted to confirm if what she said was true. Young Gu-won didn't answer. He grabbed Do-Hee and tried to leave. Actor Chen surprisingly shouted that the only thing the chairman could do was die. Young Gu-won immediately stopped him, warning him not to overstep his boundaries. Do-Hee's mind was a complete mess at this point. She left the rooftop first, intending to think things over. Young Gu-won, on the other hand, told the actress not to be so delusional, because in his eyes, she was nothing. Having said that, he went after Do-Hee. Do-Hee drove while recalling what young Gu-won had said last night. Now, it sounded more like a farewell. So she asked the housekeeper to confirm the truth of the actress's words. Do-Hee was heartbroken after learning the truth. The actor Chen's words echoed in her ears. She looked at the rushing river. She recalled her first meeting with young Gu-won. So she decided that even if she had to jump into the river 100 or 1,000 times, she would do whatever it took to get the diary back to him. Before she could finish, young Gu-won held her tightly in his arms. At this moment, the couple were both considering each other. Meanwhile, two people who hadn't found true love met again. Jisoo worried that the mark would put Do-Hee in danger. The actor exploited her worry, saying that everyone who met young Gu-won met a bad end. They didn't live but existed in purgatory. It's selling your soul and falling into hell. Joe's nephew became even more anxious after hearing this. Actor Chen revealed that today was the last chance to stop the two. On the other hand, young Gu-won brought Do-Hee to a beach. They talked from day to night, preparing to try and restore the mark to its original position. As luck would have it, the car ran out of gas halfway. They arrived at a gas station. Do-Hee wanted to buy a postcard to commemorate this important day. She went to pay first. Unbeknownst to them, someone was watching. This person was No Suk-min's son. It turned out he had two phones. One of the screens showed No Suk-min in real time. He also learned that his father had killed the murderer. But how could a little mouse fight an old fox? No Suk-min punished his son with a red-hot branding iron. His mother expertly put on her headphones. It's clear this was the result of frequent abuse. However, it wasn't over yet. No Suk-min warned his son to find a way to prove his usefulness. So this kid transferred all his hatred onto Do-Hee. Just then, Ju's nephew called Do-Hee and told her to stay away from young Gu-won, frankly admitting that he already knew the man's identity. Mistaking the devil for someone trying to harm others, he was trying to save himself. No Do-kyung suddenly started the car. He ran straight into Do-Hee. Meanwhile, No Suk-min was appointed chairman of Myri Group. Soon, the car caught fire. Then it exploded. Ignoring the actress's pleas, young Gu-won rushed into the fire. The raging fire was exactly like the scene in his dream. Suddenly, young Gu-won saw an unscorched postcard on the ground. It turns out Do-Hee wrote on top that if faced with a difficult choice, she would definitely choose him. Because losing a loved one is more painful than losing oneself. Young Gu-won came to his senses and discovered Do-Hee barely alive in the corner. He had only taken 2 steps forward when he was struck by the falling roof. By this time, the gas station was almost completely burned down. Chen and Joe's nephew both thought they were dead. Just then, young Gu-won carried Do-Hee out. Do-Hee wasn't injured at all. It turned out that in his days, young Gu-won used his last bit of strength to hold Do-Hee's hand. Miraculously, the mark returned to his wrist. This time, young Gu-won won against the gods. The devil husband and the chaebol wife caught the culprit. But what they saw was shocking. It turned out that young Gu-won saved Do-Hee, who was supposed to die from the fire. The mark returned to his wrist. The first thing the devil did after regaining his full power was, of course, to enjoy life and to complain about the insignificance of humanity. In short, young Gu-won was in a particularly good mood. Do-Hee saw his happiness and felt happy herself. However, young Gu-won was exceptionally afraid that his wife would be hurt again. He went up and scooped her up in a princess carry. Then he carefully placed her on the sofa. He was concerned about Do-Hee, although she seemed fine on the surface. But the after effects might last a long time. After this incident, he was truly scared. I almost lost my wife. Do-Hee immediately corrected him, saying it was they who almost lost each other. Then she got up and prepared to go to work. But young Gu-won immediately followed her. He offered to get things from high places and to choose which bag she should carry. In short, he was the perfect gentleman. Do-Hee worried he wouldn't make it in time. Unexpectedly, young Gu-won disappeared with a snap of his fingers. Then the fashion show began.
한치의 오점도 없이 다시 태어난 완벽한 나를 상징하는 최근 무드. 어때?
완벽해. 한치의 오점도 없이 완벽하게 제
Young Gu-won wanted Do-Hee to help him choose an outfit. Do-Hee gestured. She decided on the latest suit. In an instant, young Gu-won had changed. You could tell from Do-Hee's expression that she liked it very much. Turning around, the two arrived at the company. Secretary Yoon looked particularly embarrassed when she saw them. She greeted them with her head averted. On the other hand, No Suk-min wasn't surprised at all to learn that Do-Hee and young Gu-won hadn't been burned to death. Instead, he found it increasingly interesting. Meanwhile, the devil begins to search for a new signee. Soon, he finds a suitable one. An elderly man holds a photo of himself and his wife. He just wants her to recognize him, even just once. Before he finishes speaking, young Gu-won enters the room, saying he can fulfill his wish. But I must make a pact with myself to go to hell in 10 years. Suddenly, the old woman started shouting for her husband. It turned out she had dementia. She no longer recognized her husband, and her wish was to see her beloved husband one last time before she died. The old man turned around. I hope young Gu-won can help him.
이건 얼마 안 남았어. 고작 몇 분 널 알아보게 하려고 지옥에 가겠다는 거야.
날 알아보면 꼭 내주고 싶은.
Young Gu-won wondered if it was worth it. But he still used his magic. With a snap of his fingers, the old woman saw her husband in his youth.
여보, 어디 있다 이제 와?
어제 긴 계속 당신 옆에 있었지.
근데 왜 안 보였어? 난 그것도 모르고.
The old woman thought he didn't want her anymore. The old man was very sad. Without his wife, how could he go on living? But the old woman advised, even if she's gone, you must live a good life, because she will always be with her husband in heaven. They had agreed to meet at the San Juan River after 100 years. Neither of them should forget the other. Hearing this, a demon who's lived for over 200 years is actually shedding tears. I don't know if it's from being moved, or if he's becoming more human. Young Gu-won didn't make a contract with the old man. He just can't understand. How could someone be so foolish? To exchange 10 years for just a few minutes. A short while later, he returned to the company dejectedly. Seeing this, he suggested catching the real culprit. She thought someone had leaked their whereabouts. Only Joe's nephew. The actor Chen, the housekeeper, and Secretary Yoon knew the route that day. It just so happened that Secretary Yoon was about to leave work, and his behavior today was very unusual. So the couple decided to start their investigation with her. That night, they discovered that Yoon, the secretary, secretly went to the riverside. Then a strange man appeared, carrying a large box. Young Gu-won believed it contained bribes, exclaiming that people could do anything outrageous for money. So the couple secretly approached and planned to take a picture as evidence. Unexpectedly, Secretary Yoon and the man started kissing passionately. He was so shocked that she pressed the shutter. It turned out that the day the butler sent the drunk Secretary Yoon back, he used his clothes to wipe her nosebleed, and she considered him the perfect man. Currently, the two are in the heat of their romance. Having eliminated Secretary Yoon's suspicion, the couple returned home. Whether it was inspiration or the feeling of the housekeeper's deep affection, Young Gu-won proactively suggested taking his relationship with Doo-doo-hee further. After some time passed, Young Gu-won again dreamt of the woman he was when he was human. So who exactly was she? Older brother is causing trouble for his younger sister. This is how the brother-in-law protects his wife.
뭐라고 부를지 모르겠네. 그러면 형님 해봐 형님.
Actually, No Suk-min deliberately looked at Young Gu-won's wrist. He noticed the mark was gone. On the other hand, Doo-doo-hee looked at the photos he sent. She recalled her childhood. She once found Joo Cheon-suk staring blankly at a photo, but she realized someone was there, so she deliberately hid herself. Doo-doo-hee came to her senses and introduced her parents to Young Gu-won. She often wondered if her parents would still be alive if she hadn't been so insistent on having a birthday party. Whether her parents would still be alive. Young Gu-won felt that humanity in himself. When someone I care about suffers misfortune, I always instinctively blame myself. Actually, Doo-doo-hee understands this, but she still can't help but repeatedly think, what if I had gone with them? What would the outcome have been? At this moment, she wants a hug. Young Gu-won stood up without hesitation.
네가 내 옆에 있는 거. 그러니까 다시는 혼자 멀리 가버린다는 거 하지 마.
쏜 적.
After a while, Joe's nephew arrived at the company. He still can't believe it until now. That demons really exist in this world. But he doesn't understand why the culprit is targeting Doo-doo-hee. Isn't giving up the inheritance enough? Doo-doo-hee thinks the culprit's aim isn't money or the chairman's position, but she simply wanted to die. She thought about No Suk-min's visit earlier. He said he wanted to sponsor her company. Her nephew suggested she test No Suk-min. After all, she appeared very naive. Then, her nephew had dinner with No Suk-min and his family, but she didn't see No Duk-young. When it comes to this person, No Suk-min lied, saying his son was away on business. While he was in the bathroom, Joe's nephew opened the study door. Just as he was about to investigate further, he was suddenly called by No Suk-min. Leaving No Suk-min's house, Joe's nephew immediately informed Doo-doo-hee. It seems No Suk-min is hiding something. And earlier, he saw a green leather-bound book in the study. It was inscribed with the word devil. It's the instruction manual Young Gu-won lost. However, the nephew's every move was under No Suk-min's control. Then he went to the private ward. So No Duk-young was kept here after he was injured. At that time, he didn't know that Young Gu-won and Doo-doo-hee were still alive. No Suk-min didn't tell him. He only revealed that he hadn't proven his worth, and threatened his son to turn himself in, to take the blame for killing Joo Cheon-suk, and attempting to eliminate Doo-doo-hee. Only by doing so would he not abandon him. They're my children until the day I die. Cut to. No Duk-young arrives at the police station. He really turned himself in, just as No Suk-min said he would. Meanwhile, Doo-doo-hee and Young Gu-won use their magic to locate him here. They don't know why No Duk-young came, so they suddenly appear in front of him. Of course, the security cameras can't see them. Actually, Doo-doo-hee just wants to know who exactly killed Joo Cheon-suk. No Duk-young claims he was just following orders, but when asked about the mastermind, he became incoherent, like a madman. Further questioning yielded nothing. That night, while sleeping, Young Gu-won had that strange dream again. This time, he saw the woman's face, and the moment he swung his sword at her. Suddenly, Young Gu-won woke up in a fright. Could it be that Doo-doo-hee from 200 years ago was killed by him? He was the son of a wealthy family, respected and loved by the villagers, while she was a singer who refused to submit to authority, living a life of displacement. By chance, the two met. Since then, the wealthy young master, under the guise of studying, waited for the singer to dance at their meeting place. But his poor acting was obvious. To anyone with discerning eyes, his purpose was clear. As their meetings increased, the two naturally became close, and the young master fell deeply in love with the singer. That night, neither of them went home. The young master was curious why she had come to this small town from Hanyang City. The singer frankly admitted that she refused to dance for high-ranking officials. Although she was a courtesan, she couldn't follow her heart and preferred not to dance. But if that's the case, to survive, I could only escape here. Young master guessed there must be something. A reason why the singer would rather die than dance. At this time, a firefly flew by. Young master carefully caught it and placed it in front of the two of them. The atmosphere was already set. He naturally expressed his admiration. However, the singer was shocked when she heard it. The young master thought the other party didn't believe him, immediately stating he could marry her right away. And according to his status, he could only take her into his household as a concubine at most.
우리끼리 도망치면
세상에서 영원히 도망칠 수 없습니다. 이 세상이 변하지 않는 도련님과 저의 끝도 변하지 않...
Until then, the geisha revealed the reason she couldn't dance. That day, she saw her most precious friend end their own life. The reason is that the friend and the young master of the scholar fell in love with each other. But reality is contrary to their wishful thinking. Therefore, love cannot save people. Instead, it only makes people weak. Having said that, the singer turned to leave. But the young master called out to her. He insisted that love can save people.
만약 나락으로 떨어지는 걸 막을 수 없다면 기꺼이 너와 함께 떨어지겠다.
Actually, the singer had already fallen for the young master. Because of their vastly different social standing, she still didn't dare to take another step closer. Not long after, the young master found a Western book that advocated the idea of all men being created equal, a philosophy that rejected the notion of high and low social status. After reading it, the singer finally opened her heart. But to be safe, the young master decided to participate in the imperial examination and pass with flying colors. This way, the two of them could get married. However, this kind of love often ends in tragedy. Soon, the servant boy told the master, the city's scholar official, about the young master and the singer. Not long after, before the young master left for Hanyang City, he gave the ornament he was wearing to the singer as a token of his affection. The singer also promised that she would keep it on her person until his return. However, the young master had barely left the small town when the king of Joseon issued an edict abolishing Western literature, ordering the death of anyone found studying it. Those who harbored such students would have their homes burned. The master feared the consequences would affect his only son. He decided to choose a scapegoat, and that person was the songstress. After enduring cruel punishments, the censor pressured her to reveal other followers, because he didn't believe the small town only had one, and he showed the token, promising that as long as she revealed the owner, then I could live. I don't know how long it took. The young master truly returned home after passing the imperial examination, and that same day was also the day the songstress was executed. Although the young master desperately rushed to the execution ground, he was ultimately too late. He saw her, barely alive. The words, "Admiration cannot save a person," echoed in his ears. Reason was instantly replaced by hatred. In the end, he became a demon. The young master drew his sword. He slaughtered everyone present. Even his ever-present attendant was not spared. After confirming there were no survivors, he also chose to kill himself.
당신이 있는 곳이 천국이라면 난 가지 않겠어.
Young Gu-won suddenly awoke. Looking at the sleeping Do-do-hee, I finally remembered my faith. Cost her life. The K-drama contract with the devil enters a high-energy phase. On the day Do-do-hee's parents were in a car accident, Ju Cheon-suk encountered the devil. It turns out that after Young Gu-won recovered his human memories, he immediately saw God. I don't understand why she turned herself into a demon. Even the gods didn't hide it. They frankly admitted that both heaven and hell need manpower. And faith is a dangerous thing. Perhaps it's the most dangerous thing in this life. She saw that Young Gu-won was worried about history repeating itself. He was afraid that Do-do-hee would suffer again. But unfortunately, fate may truly repeat itself. The gods say that Young Gu-won caused it all. And this is the price he pays for his actions. Meanwhile, the eldest daughter-in-law advises her son to be patient. No Suk-min will surely get him out of there. However, No Du-kyung is angry that his mother knows about his father's abuse and turns a blind eye. Unexpectedly, the eldest daughter-in-law blames her son for not listening to his father, claiming that he was punished because he failed to prove himself. Du-kyung completely breaks down after hearing this. He angrily reminds his mother that she'll be the next one to suffer. Not long after leaving the detention center, the eldest daughter-in-law receives a phone call. She fainted instantly after hearing that. Meanwhile, Do-do-hee also received the news. No Du-kyung had committed suicide in prison, in the blink of an eye, at his funeral. No Suk-min cried very sadly, while his eldest daughter-in-law looked at her husband with deep meaning. It turned out that every time her son was abused, she would desperately scratch her own arms, to the point where the entire skin was completely ulcerated. After the funeral, Do-do-hee went before No Suk-min. No Suk-min immediately apologized for his son's murder of Ju Cheon-suk, but then he changed the subject, hoping she would consider the company, and not publicize the matter. No Suk-min thought that if the outside world knew, if my grandson, suffering from a mental illness, killed his own grandmother for profit, the company would inevitably suffer greatly. This request isn't just for the company, but also for my family. I'm begging you. No Suk-min emphasized that after all, he and Do-do-hee are family. Leaving those words behind, Do-do-hee and Young Gu-won left. Turning around, the two arrived at Ju Cheon-suk's grave. Do-do-hee thought everything was over, but ultimately, nothing changed. She asked Young Gu-won, will everything really get better with the passage of time? Young Gu-won recalled his past as a human, and frankly said, no. It's just temporary forgetfulness. That evening, the couple watched the Sienla Consortium's performance. After this performance, actress Chen was preparing to leave the country and not return. However, watching her dance, young Gu-won seemed to see the shadow of the songstress. That forgotten memory kept flashing back, as if reminding him that it wouldn't end well. Thinking of this, young Gu-won's eyes welled up. Do-he immediately noticed that he cared if she was okay. Young Gu-won confessed that when he was human, he had killed many people. Among them were those who loved him and those he loved.
이유가 있었어?
그들이 내가 사랑하는 여인을 제물로 바쳐.
He felt much guilt, thinking that if he hadn't fallen in love with her, she might not have died. So I'm really scared now. I'm afraid history will repeat itself. Do-he comforts young Gu-won? If fate is destined to repeat itself, then let's face it together. Do-he at this moment is like she was back then. Her eyes are full of determination. Young Gu-won decided to create a perfect ending this time. Episode 283,983. The day of Do-he's parents' car accident, 283,983, was actually the day young Gu-won revoked the contract. Just as he finished his mission, he saw Ju Cheon-suk nearby, and the devil gave her a sinister smile. His wife, suffering from domestic abuse by her husband, was sent to a private ward. A man suddenly appeared in the bathroom, but she wasn't surprised at all. Meanwhile, because of a single sentence, the big boss revealed his true face. It turned out that young Gu-won had told Do-he in detail about what happened when he was human. After listening, Do-he simply hugged him tightly. Do-he hugged him tightly after hearing this, while lamenting the pitiful nature of his past life. He also felt the ending wasn't perfect. And this is precisely what young Gu-won will do next. He first used his magic to extinguish all the lights, then revealed the fireflies in his palm. Their ending in this life. He must rewrite it into a perfect one. On the way to work the next day, Do-he suddenly remembered that it was Christmas. Young Gu-won thought that since it was a holiday, he should listen to the appropriate music. At that moment, Do-he noticed a traffic accident nearby. Her thoughts were instantly pulled back to the day her parents passed away. She looked especially sad. Young Gu-won saw her expression clearly. Then he met with his nephew, Jo. After all, only he truly understood Do-he. Young Gu-won wants his wife to be happy, but Do-he always feels guilty during happy moments. Gu-ju's nephew understands. Do-he once mentioned a cafe before her parents passed away. Those few years when her family was together were the happiest time of her life. Because misfortune struck right at the peak of her happiness. So Sho's nephew speculates that Do-he might have acted that way out of fear. After the car accident, Do-he moved from relative's house to relative's house, and all her relatives were after her inheritance and compensation money. Once the money ran out, she became a burden. Later, Ju Cheon-suk adopted Do-he. It was under her influence that Do-he gradually opened her heart. But now Ju Cheon-suk has also passed away. Do-he, during this time, in order to find the murderer, briefly forgot her pain. After No Du-kyung's conviction, she probably remembered the past again. That night, Do-he fell asleep in the study. Young Gu-won saw her dreaming. In her dream, little Do-he was helpless and calling out for her parents and Ju Cheon-suk. But she received no response. Young Gu-won couldn't bear it. He entered Do-he's dream. He gave her a warm hug. At this moment, Do-he cried and blamed herself. She blamed herself for her parents' death.
아무 잘못 없어.
근데 나 찾으려는 거야.
Then young Gu-won took Do-he back home. Her parents and Ju Cheon-suk were decorating the Christmas tree. She had fantasized about this scene many times. So, regardless of whether it was a dream or not, she happily spent Christmas with her family. On the other hand, the eldest daughter-in-law has been tormented by No Suk-min to the point of being neurotic. She wants to escape this house, so she opened the safe. Inside, she found the devil's instruction manual. However, before she could even look at it, No Suk-min appeared behind her. He then realized that his wife wasn't unaware of anything. She was just pretending to be uninvolved. That evening, everyone was invited to No Suk-min's dinner party. But No Suk-min's real purpose was to buy out their shares. Do-he was the first to disagree. She and young Gu-won stood up and left, followed by the nephew. He hoped his older brother wouldn't make a wrong decision. Even No Suan, who usually seems obedient, refused. However, No Suk-min warned her. My brotherly kindness ends today. You're on your own from now on. The next morning, prosecutors raided Ju Ji-hyuk's company on charges of illegal compensation payments. He immediately found No Suk-min and demanded to know what he was doing. It turns out No Suk-min had laid off some employees beforehand. He also converted some to temporary contract positions. In Ju's nephew's eyes, it's tantamount to reckless disregard for human life. But No Suk-min doesn't see it that way. It's business as usual. And he immediately called the board of directors to resolve to dismiss Ju Suk-hoon from all his positions. Go ahead and try. The sleeping power is more significant. After he learned about this, she stormed into No Suk-min's office and accused him of being autocratic, violating Ju Cheon-suk's business philosophy. However, No Suk-min stated that his mother's era was over because he had broken out of his shell. Hearing this, he recalled, "We found the hitman's phone together with young Gu-won. The name on it was the author of a book. This person destroyed everything to get what they wanted. They wouldn't hesitate to destroy everything. In other words, No Suk-min killed Ju Cheon-suk, but No Suk-min blamed Do-he. He even said if it weren't for her, then everyone wouldn't have ended up like this. How could you attack your own mother? That old woman is a devil. She's the one who made me like this. It's your great Ju Cheon-suk." No Suk-min told Do-he that her parents were murdered by Ju Cheon-suk. Meanwhile, young Gu-won found his eldest daughter-in-law. He asked if she had seen a green book. His eldest daughter-in-law lied and said she hadn't.
찾으면 연락해. 혹시 알아? 그게 너를 지옥에서 건져줘야 통합줄이 될지.
Then she left the ward. Meanwhile, No Suk Min took out a recording device. It turned out that on the day Ju Hee parents and Ju Cheon Suk argued, he was also present and secretly recorded it. Ju Cheon Suk furiously chased Ju Hee's parents' car. A car accident happened as a result. Later, the company went on to become South Korea's. However, No Suk Min became more and more agitated. He grabbed her neck. Meanwhile, the eldest daughter-in-law caught up with young Gu-won. He admits that he killed Ju Cheon Suk and No Do-kyung. He also tried to kill Ju Hee. So, will young Gu-won succeed in saving Ju Hee this time? Unexpectedly, the death of the female lead's parents is really related to the devil, young Gu-won. Just as No Suk Min was about to strangle Ju Hee, he was suddenly flung away. Immediately afterward, young Gu-won lifted him into the air by his neck with one hand. When the bodyguards outside heard a strange noise and rushed into the office, all three were gone. Cut to. Young Gu-won used his magic to bring No Suk Min and Ju Hee to a 100-meter high platform. However, No Suk Min knew that, as long as the demon killed someone, he would turn to ashes. So he wasn't afraid at all. Actually, young Gu-won was deliberately stalling. He was just buying time. Because at that moment, his eldest daughter-in-law had arrived at the police station. She had exposed all of her husband's crimes. After hearing this, No Suk Min started to get scared. He begged to sign the contract with the devil immediately. I'm willing to give up anything, as long as my actions remain secret. And I guarantee I won't lay a finger on Ju Hee again. But young Gu-won naturally disagreed. Even now, he dares to mention his wife. Seeing his pleas were useless, No Suk Min steeled his resolve. He wrenched his hand free from young Gu-won's grasp. He fell straight down. It seemed all the grudges ended there. However, the media revealed the fact that No Suk Min murdered his mother, and emphasized that his body was not found. Even young Gu-won's teleportation couldn't find him. It's almost certain he's dead. However, Ju Hee still harbored resentment towards him. She couldn't let go of the fact that Ju Cheon Suk killed her parents. The next day, the eldest daughter-in-law returned the devil's instruction manual to young Gu-won. Young Gu-won couldn't contain his doubts. He asked her if she knew what No Suk Min said about Ju Cheon Suk killing Ju Hee's parents. The eldest daughter-in-law said that although she didn't know, but if No Suk Min said it, then it was probably true. Meanwhile, while Ju Hee was using her computer, the top news story was the No Suk Min death case. That part sounded absurd, but it was a thought she couldn't shake off, ringing in her ears once more. So Ju Hee searched for posts about major incidents within the corporation. Among them is one where Ju Cheon Suk kneels to apologize. There's a cane next to her. She immediately summoned Secretary Yoon to inquire about the situation. Secretary Yoon understood that Ju Cheon Suk only started using the cane on the day of Ju Hee's parents' funeral. However, the specific reason is unknown. As for the specific reason, she doesn't know. Afternoon. The couple came to Ju Cheon Suk's study, attempting to find some useful clues. Young Gu-won comforts Ju Hee. If only the deceased could speak, then everything would be clear. At that moment, Ju Hee notices Ju Cheon Suk's prayer book. There's a way to hear what Ju Cheon Suk said. The two of them rushed to the church. The priest had been waiting for Ju Hee. It turned out Ju Cheon Suk had instructed him, if she didn't have the courage to confess before she died, and if Ju Hee wanted to know the truth, then she should tell her. Ju Hee's parents discovered that Ju Cheon Suk had falsified the data. This led to the death of an employee. However, Ju Cheon Suk had to do this to secure a huge investment. She had no choice. That's why both sides ended up arguing. We don't have time for this. Just you wait and see. You will absolutely not get your way. After issuing their threats, the parents left. Ju Cheon Suk was angry and followed them. Two cars sped along, one behind the other. At 11:57, Ju Hee's mother reminded them again. That time was running out. Ju Hee's father floored the gas pedal, guaranteeing he would see his daughter before leaving. Suddenly, the front right tire blew. The car spun out of control. It hit a roadside barrier and crashed. When Ju Hee's father woke up, Ju Hee's mother was already dead, and the devil was standing before him. Ju Hee's father begged him to save his wife. You can't make any more wishes. Because 10 years ago, you and I already signed a contract. After 12 o'clock, it was exactly the day the contract expired. In other words, what did Ju Hee's father exchange with the devil? That's why he desperately rushed home to see his daughter. While young Gu-won finished his work, he discovered Ju Cheon Suk. He saw a deep longing in her eyes. Should I help you fulfill your wish? So, did Ju Cheon Suk make a contract with the devil? His wife witnessed it. The demonic husband took the soul of the signatory. It seems to confirm his direct involvement in the deaths of her parents. It turns out that after Ju Hee learned from the priest the truth about her parents' deaths, she intentionally avoided young Gu-won. She locked herself in the bathroom and muffled her mouth to stop herself from crying. Young Gu-won mistakenly thought his wife was too sad and didn't think much of it, leaning against the door. He didn't know how long it had been. When Ju Hee came out, she happened to run into young Gu-won, who was going to sign a contract. And the target of this contract was the pastor from earlier that day. The pastor was not afraid at all. I also advise young Gu-won to leave Ju Hee, because as soon as I see him, I think of the devil Ju Cheon Suk spoke of. Only now. Did young Gu-won recall that day's events? The angel suddenly appeared behind young Gu-won, saying it was normal not to recognize someone he'd met years ago. After all, humans reset easily. Unfortunate fate doesn't replay in the future, but begins in the past. After young Gu-won returned home, he found Ju Hee was gone. At that time, Ju Hee had come to Ju Cheon Suk's grave.
정서가 나한테 솔직했다면 난 정권을 사랑하지 않았을까?
Young Gu-won happened to overhear her. Without saying a word, he turned and left the cemetery. Actually, Ju Hee hadn't finished speaking. She needs to figure out exactly what her father exchanged. Perhaps young Gu-won saved his life. Scene change. Ju Hee finds the butler. She wants to talk to him about young Gu-won. Unfortunately, there's a problem with the performance. So the butler asks Du Doohee to go to the office first. He'll be there as soon as he handles things. Du Doohee entered the office and went straight to the room filled with clocks, relishing the happy memories of that night. Suddenly, a woman rushed into the office, looking for the devil. Young Goo-won immediately appeared in front of her. The woman's purpose was to break the contract. She no longer wanted the money or the success. I've regretted it every day since signing the contract.
내가 소원 들은 거 싹 다 토해낼 테니까 제발 내 목숨만은 살려.
Young Goo-won's eyes instantly turned bloodshot. He stared intently at the woman. The woman gradually found herself unable to breathe. She painfully knelt on the ground. Young Goo-won watched her impassively until she had no strength left to move.
이런 게 바로 대원이니까.
Soon, the woman lost her life due to lack of air. This scared Du Doohee behind him. A clock in the secret room suddenly disappeared. She finally understood. Each clock represents a signatory. In other words, her father's clock was also once here. Meanwhile, the butler, on his way to the office after finishing his task, ran into Young Goo-won. Shocked, he asked him if he had seen Du Doohee. Young Goo-won only then realized that Du Doohee had been there earlier. So he immediately chased after her. Seeing him, Du Doohee unconsciously took a step back. Young Goo-won understood that his wife was afraid of him. Therefore, he didn't try to stop her. That night, Young Goo-won proactively sought out Du Doohee. He invited her for a walk. Although Du Doohee was scared, but I still agreed. Walking, Young Goo-won told her, "Save yourself from hell." Then he released her hand and disappeared on the spot.
그렇게 나의 구원은 사라졌다.
They say that when the cherry blossoms are about to bloom, winter has already arrived underground. Perhaps for Du Doohee and Young Goo-won, while we shared happy moments together, separation was also destined to begin. After Young Goo-won disappeared, Du Doohee spent a few days in a daze. A week later, she finally mustered the courage to leave the house. On the one hand, it was to cooperate with the prosecutor's investigation. On the other hand, it was to arrange company work. But No Suk-min's body was never found. My colleagues all speculated that he might have been eaten by a fish. Actually, before Young Goo-won left, he handed over the position of chairman of the Settle Group to the butler. As for how long he would be gone, he said until Du Doohee had a happy ending of her own. He also conveniently put their love token in a safety deposit box. However, the butler's best skill is finding things. He hesitated whether to tell Du Doohee about what happened 200 years ago. Then maybe the situation would change. But in the end, the butler gave up. After all, Young Goo-won hates gossips the most. Du Doohee resumed her normal work. But in the eyes of Secretary Yoon, who had experienced a relationship, she was just trying to numb herself with work. That noon, Joe's nephew brought a lunchbox to visit Du Doohee. He kindly inquired if Young Goo-won had really left. Du Doohee thought it was purely because the contract had expired. After all, they had agreed that once the culprit was caught, and the mark returned to Young Goo-won's wrist, their relationship would end. Furthermore, the two also talked about Ju Cheon-suk. Du Doohee didn't understand. Was she really adopted by her out of guilt? Joe's nephew told Du Doohee that when she was in trouble last time, Ju Cheon-suk said this to herself: "The more I love Du Doohee, the more painful it becomes." Only then did Du Doohee understand Ju Cheon-suk's love for her. That night, somewhere in a homeless encampment, No Suk-min was warming himself by the fire. He was thinking about how to get revenge on Du Doohee. After a long day, Du Doohee returned home. She looked at the empty room. She lay down on the sofa. She kept comforting herself, saying it was okay. Everything had simply returned to its original starting point. After all, she had always been alone. When Du Doohee woke up and opened her eyes, she found herself lying in bed, and there was still warmth beside her. She rushed out of the bedroom and called out Young Goo-won's name, but received no answer. Fortunately, Du Doohee had a group of lively and cheerful colleagues, so her life wasn't so lonely. Du Doohee, having had a few too many drinks, returned to her apartment building. She accidentally fell. She scraped her knee and it was bleeding. She went inside and habitually flopped onto the sofa. She drifted off to sleep. Just then, someone slowly walked in. He sat down beside her. That person was Young Goo-won. After settling Du Doohee, Young Goo-won carefully lay down beside her. He tidied her stray hair and gently held her hand. The next morning, Du Doohee woke up and found her knee injury was gone. Because of this, she told Secretary Yoon, "I always feel like Young Goo-won is right beside me." But Secretary Yoon thinks it's just post-breakup syndrome. Secretary Yoon is getting ready to leave work for the night. But seeing Du Doohee working overtime again, she can't help but remind her that when she got divorced, she also buried herself in work, forcing herself to get better quickly. She thought that pretending to be strong would improve her mood. However, I found that simply avoiding it won't heal everything with the passage of time. I must thoroughly feel the pain, cry, and vent my emotions. I must be true to my inner feelings. Only then will time become a cure. After Secretary Yoon left the office, Du Doohee's eyes welled up. She turned and went into Young Goo-won's office. She found the devil's instruction manual. She discovered their sticker photos. In an instant, those beautiful memories flashed before her eyes like a slideshow. These memories left Du Doohee breathless and heartbroken. Suddenly, someone burst into the office. He went to such lengths for revenge that he destroyed his own face, ultimately leading to the demon's demise. It turned out that the butler suddenly rushed into the office and saw Du Doohee weeping, her face hidden. He didn't understand why she would be there in the middle of the night. Du Doohee didn't hide it. She admitted that she missed Young Goo-won terribly, but she didn't know where he had gone. "I can say I know nothing about him. The deeper the love, the greater the torment." The housekeeper couldn't bear it. She gave her the love token and explained that it would help when she missed Young Goo-won terribly. Back home, Du Doohee put on the necklace. That night, she seemed to return to 200 years ago. She dreamt of her identity, suffering humiliation, and the mockery of the other geishas. She planned to dance one last time, to end her unjust life. By such a coincidence, she met the young master. However, the good times didn't last. She was pushed onto the execution platform. Though she had no regrets and no attachments left. She only wished to see her young master one last time. She wanted to tell him personally, "Please forget me." That way, her young master wouldn't suffer. Their shared memories wouldn't become a torment. Dreaming this, he suddenly woke up. Only then did she realize that she was the person Young Gu-won liked. She guessed Young Gu-won might be there. So she immediately prepared to drive there. But as soon as she got into the driver's seat, she saw No Suk-min's hunting rifle on the passenger seat. When he woke up again, her hands and feet were already tied up. Seeing her awake, No Suk-min muttered to himself. To escape his demonic powers, he destroyed half his face. Now, his only desire is to destroy Do-hee and Young Gu-won. He grabbed Do-hee's hair, forcing her to summon the demon. However, No Suk-min didn't believe him, and plunged a dagger into Do-hee's thigh. Then he yelled, demanding Young Gu-won's appearance. But after shouting for a while, there was still no response. No Suk-min then turned his attention to Do-hee. He planned to kill her first. Young Gu-won was angrily glaring at No Suk-min. Unexpectedly, No Suk-min became even more excited. He was about to kill Do-hee immediately. Young Gu-won's anger reached its peak. The pillars on the rooftop began to crumble. They fell directly onto No Suk-min. However, it wasn't over yet. Young Gu-won manipulated the stones, increasing the weight. He tried to crush No Suk-min to death. Seeing this, Do-hee immediately used her dagger to cut the rope. Then she hugged Young Gu-won tightly, begged him to stop immediately. Otherwise, he'll be reduced to ashes. Amidst Do-hee's desperate pleas, Young Gu-won regained his senses and moved the boulder away. Just then, No Suk-min emerged carrying a hunting rifle. After dealing with No Suk-min, Young Gu-won frantically called Do-hee's name, but she couldn't hear him anymore. Young Gu-won decided to revive Do-hee using the power granted by the gods. Then he kissed her passionately. After a while, Do-hee woke up. She realized Young Gu-won might disappear. At that moment, the devil's mark on his back began to burn. Despite this, Do-hee desperately begged Young Gu-won not to leave her, but it couldn't stop the burning speed. In an instant, Young Gu-won turned to ashes, disappearing before Do-hee's eyes, leaving only the wedding ring behind. So, what will the ending be for the devil and Do-hee? The Korean drama A Deal with the Devil finally reached its finale. After Young Gu-won turned to ashes, the happiest person was No Suk-min. He felt he had destroyed the couple with his own hands. Do-hee was consumed by immense grief. She didn't leave the house for a whole week. She found a world without Young Gu-won unbearable. Her nephew worried that she would take her own life if this continued. However, Do-hee believed her life was bought with Young Gu-won's, so she had to stay in this hellish world. This was her deserved punishment. Furthermore, Do-hee took responsibility for Young Gu-won's death. Christmas was approaching. Do-hee wandered the streets alone. She dressed herself up and came to where it all began. Sometimes, missing someone feels like drinking a glass of ice water. It takes a long time for tears to fall. Do-hee makes a wish to the sky. She hopes to make a contract. The contract's content is that Young Gu-won will return. Unbeknownst to her, her voice is heard by the gods. And this time, the gods decide to be merciful. Immediately, a gale begins to howl. The sea dances along. The water droplets about to splash Do-hee suddenly stopped. She slowly opened her eyes. The scene before her was exactly the same as when she first met Young Gu-won. Do-hee turned her head in disbelief. That devil, Young Gu-won, who tempted her into signing a contract. He really came back. Do-hee didn't bother to think. She directly burrowed into his arms. That ethereal feeling, yet so real. Was it a dream, or a hallucination born of longing? Young Gu-won told Do-hee it wasn't a dream. Neither of them had died. The scene changes. The couple lay in bed. Do-hee returned the wedding ring to Young Gu-won, and Young Gu-won uttered that familiar phrase, recharge, waiting for Do-hee to fall asleep. Young Gu-won immediately thanked the heavens. However, the heavens told him that this happened because Do-hee wanted to make a contract. Hearing this, Young Gu-won wondered what price she paid. Young Gu-won then remembered his gamble with the heavens, and his sincere plea to the heavens. Maybe that's what touched her. On Christmas night, Do-hee couldn't contain her doubts, and asked Young Gu-won what exactly her father had exchanged for the contract. It turned out that on the night of the torrential rain, there had been a 12-car pileup. Do-hee's father rushed his pregnant wife, Do-hee's mother, to the hospital. However, the emergency room was already overflowing with patients. The doctor recommended going to another hospital immediately. But on the way to the other hospital, the couple accidentally fell. And at this time, Do-hee's mother started bleeding heavily. It looked like it was going to be a double fatality. Do-hee's father could only helplessly call for help. Just then, the devil, Young Gu-won, appeared. Before he could even speak, Do-hee's father begged for his wife and child's salvation. He promised to agree to any condition. He swore he wouldn't regret it. By a twist of fate, Do-hee's father signed a contract to save his wife and child's lives. The reason Young Gu-won didn't tell Do-hee was because he worried she would overthink it. However, Do-hee was very grateful to Young Gu-won. It seems her parents knew she didn't have much time left. For those 10 years, they did everything they could to make her happy. Now, for a bonus scene. After everything returned to normal, Do He visited No Suk Min and revealed that she and Young Gu Won were fine. In the end, the only one he destroyed was himself. No Suk Min was completely overwhelmed by this stimulation. That night, he saw the deceased Ju Cheon Suk. 4 months later, Young Gu Won initiated a humane service when reclaiming contracts. He would feel compassion for anyone pitiful. However, once the butler discovered that someone was a scoundrel, it was a snap of the fingers. Joe's nephew took the position of chairman of the board. Actually, Do he knows. The board supports her because of Ju Cheon Suk's will. But in terms of ability, her nephew is more outstanding. Furthermore, No Suk Min's final verdict has been reached. The Supreme Court sentenced him to death. In other words, he'll spend the rest of his life in prison. Additionally, the prosecutor revealed that during the investigation, they discovered Ju Cheon Suk had terminal pancreatic cancer. And that's precisely why she urged Do He to marry quickly.
몸속에 피 대신 뻥을 흘린다더니 정말이네.
That's basically the end of the story. Young Gu Won and Do He became each other's saviors and destroyers.